Her father gambled away $5 million belonging to the most dangerous man in Chicago. And when Mateo Voss showed up at midnight to collect, he didn't come alone. He came with two men, a black SUV, and a debt that could only be paid in blood. Graham Ellison had nothing left. No money, no leverage, no way out. But his daughter did. Briar Ellison stood in that rain-slicked doorway, a trauma nurse who had spent years pulling people back from the edge, and she made the one offer no one in that room expected. She would take his place. Like and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The rain started sometime around 10 and hadn't quit. By midnight it was coming down in sheets, the kind of Chicago rain that didn't fall so much as a tack. Sideways, relentless, drumming against glass and concrete with the patience of something that had nothing to lose. The streetlights on West Huron bled orange through the wet and turned the sidewalk into a smear of color, and the whole neighborhood smelled like exhaust and wet stone and the faint chemical rot of the river not far enough away. Briar Ellison had worked a 12-hour shift at Mercy General, and her feet were reminding her of every single one of those hours. She'd kicked her shoes off inside the apartment door and was standing at the kitchen counter in her scrub socks, waiting for the kettle, when she heard the sound. Not a knock. A knock was polite. A knock said, "I am here. Please acknowledge me when you have a moment." What she heard was weight. A fist, not knuckles. 3 impacts that rattled the door in its frame and sent a small ripple through the water glass she'd set on the counter. Briar didn't move for a second, just stood there, hand wrapped around the cold lip of the kettle, listening to the rain. The sound came again. Same weight, same patience. Like whoever was on the other side already knew she was home and had no particular urgency about the matter because they had decided, long before arriving at her door, how the night was going to end. She crossed the living room in her socks. The apartment was small and the layout was simple. A front room, a kitchen, a bedroom off a short hallway, and she'd lived in it for 3 years without much changing. A second-hand couch she'd never gotten around to replacing. A stack of medical journals on the coffee table she kept meaning to organize. A photo on the shelf above the television. Her and her father at Navy Pier, taken 6 years ago, back when he still looked like the man she remembered from childhood, rather than the hollowed-out version that had replaced him. She looked through the peephole. 2 men she didn't recognize, standing just outside the pool of light from the hallway fixture. Big. Dressed well, which somehow made them worse. One was holding an umbrella that wasn't doing much for either of them. And between them, sagging, one arm across each of their shoulders, like a man who had stopped being able to hold himself upright, was her father. Briar's hand found the deadbolt. She stopped herself. Thought. Counted to 3. Then she opened the door. The smell hit her first. Bourbon and fear sweat, the specific combination she associated with 3 a.m. emergency rooms, and bad news that hadn't finished arriving yet. Graham Ellison was 61 years old and looked, in this particular moment, closer to 80. His shirt was untucked. His lip was split and the blood had dried to a dark line at the corner of his mouth. His left eye was swollen nearly shut, and his hands— she looked at his hands because that was what she always did. Hands told you things, were shaking in a fine continuous tremor that had nothing to do with cold. "Dad!" Her voice came out flat. Not alarmed. She'd learned, somewhere across a decade of emergency nursing, how to keep her voice flat when her chest was doing something entirely different. Graham Ellison looked at her with his one good eye, and what she saw in it stopped her cold. Not pain. She could handle pain. She'd been handling pain professionally for 10 years. What she saw was the specific expression of a man who had already reckoned with his own death and was on the other side of that reckoning, in the quiet, devastated territory beyond it. "Briar," he said. That was all. "Bring him in," she said to the 2 men. Neither of them moved. "He doesn't come in yet." The voice came from the hallway, farther back than she'd been looking, past the reach of the light. Briar looked. A 3rd man stepped forward. He'd been standing at the far end of the hall, still as furniture, and she hadn't seen him because she'd been looking at what she was supposed to look at, which meant she'd been managed, and that realization sent a thin cold wire of anger through her chest that she filed away for later. He was tall, dark coat, the collar up against the rain he'd just come in from. Dark eyes that moved over her face, and the apartment doorway, and the distance between them with the unhurried quality of a man taking inventory. His face was sharp-featured, not beautiful exactly, but constructed, like everything about it had been arranged by a process that had very little to do with chance. He was somewhere in his late 30s, and he moved down the hallway toward her with the kind of quiet that wasn't stillness, it was control. The difference between a man who had nothing to do and a man who had decided to do nothing and knew the distinction mattered. Breyer didn't step back. She had learned, also somewhere across that same decade, that stepping back was information you gave people, and she was not in the habit of giving information away for free. "You're Breyer Ellison," the man said. Not a question. "You already knew that before you knocked on my door." He almost smiled. Something shifted at the edge of his mouth, brief and controlled as everything else about him. "Matteo Voss," he said. She knew the name. You didn't live in certain parts of Chicago without knowing the name. You heard it the way you heard weather reports. Not because you wanted to, but because the information was relevant to your survival. Matteo Voss ran the North Side's most significant piece of organized crime infrastructure from behind a legitimately impressive portfolio. 4 luxury hotels, 2 private medical clinics, a construction company that had won more city contracts than anyone in the press had ever bothered to track. He was not a street-level thug. He was not loud about what he was. He was exactly the kind of danger that didn't announce itself until you were already inside it. "What did he do?" Breyer said. Not to Voss. To her father. Graham's head dropped. "Breyer? How much?" Silence. The rain worked at the window at the end of the hall. $5 million, Matteo said. "Give or take. $5 million. She ran the number through her mind the way she ran blood pressure readings. Not emotionally, just factually, checking to see what it meant in practical terms. What it meant was that there was no practical solution. There was no number she could reach by selling the apartment, cashing out whatever remained of her savings, liquidating anything she owned. There was no path that ended with her writing a check. Her father made a sound, not words, just a sound from somewhere low in his chest that she recognized because she had heard variations of it in triage. And what it meant was, "I understand what is about to happen to me, and I have stopped being able to fight it." "He borrowed against my operation," Matteo said. His voice was conversational. That was the part that made her skin tighten. Not anger in it, not even coldness, just the flat practicality of a man discussing an accounting matter. 3 separate tranches over 14 months. He was running a sports book out of a bar on the west side. Arrangement was that the profits serviced the debt. The profits, he paused, brief, stopped servicing anything about 8 months ago. "He lost it," Breyer said. "He lost it." Matteo's eyes moved to Graham for a moment and then back to her. "The bar is gone. The book is gone. Your father has been living on what's left of a second mortgage and some very optimistic thinking." Breyer looked at her father. She wanted to feel something clean, fury, maybe, or grief. What she felt instead was the complicated interior weather of a woman who had been watching her father dismantle himself for years and had not been able to stop it, not because she hadn't tried, but because you cannot save someone who hasn't decided they want saving. The anger was there. It was just old anger. It had been living in her chest so long it had become structural. "What happens now?" she said. "That depends," Matteo said, "on whether your father has anything useful to offer me." "He doesn't." She said it before Graham could speak, because she could see he was about to say something that would make everything worse. She'd watched him do that her whole life. Find the one thing to say that would make the situation worse and say it with the sincere conviction that it was going to help. "He has nothing. You know he has nothing, or you wouldn't be here at midnight. If he had assets you could seize, you would have already seized them. You're here because you've run out of the easy options and you're working through what's left." Matteo looked at her. The look lasted long enough that the 2 men holding her father exchanged a glance. "You're not what I expected," Matteo said. "I'm a trauma nurse. I've had this conversation about payment and liability approximately 800 times, just with hospital administrators instead of—" She paused, deliberate. "You." "Breyer." Her father's voice raw and wrecked. "Don't." "I'm handling it, Dad." "You can't handle this. Stand still and be quiet." She said it the way she said it to patients, not unkind, not gentle, just precise. The voice that said, "I need you to stop making this harder." Graham went quiet. She looked at Matteo Voss. She looked at him the way she looked at scans, at charts, at the particular arrangements of trauma that walked through her ER, reading, not just seeing. "What would square the debt?" she said. $5 million. "I don't have $5 million. Neither does he. You know that." "Then we have a problem. What if the debt was serviced differently?" A pause. "Say that again." "You have 2 private medical clinics. I've heard about them. They're not publicly listed, which means they're not primarily serving a public clientele, which means you have a specific and probably ongoing need for medical professionals who are discreet, competent, and not in the habit of asking questions they don't need the answers to." She watched his face. Nothing moved in it. She kept going. "I'm a trauma nurse with 10 years of emergency and critical care experience. I've worked mass casualty events. I've worked gunshot wounds, stab wounds, crush injuries, and every variation of catastrophic blood loss that a major American city can produce. I don't panic. I don't freeze. And I have never in my professional life reported anything to anyone that I wasn't required by law to report." The hallway was very quiet. "You're offering to work for me," Matteo said. "I'm offering to work off the debt. There's a difference. I'm not asking to work for you. I'm proposing a contract. Service for debt reduction, with a defined term and defined conditions. You get a skilled medical professional on retainer. My father goes home. The debt is serviced through labor instead of liquidation." Graham made a sound behind her that might have been her name. "You understand what that would mean?" Matteo said. Not a question either, a statement with an implicit test inside it. "It means I would be inside your operation. It means I would see things that require discretion. It means the terms of the contract would need to include protections for both parties. I don't report what I see that isn't my legal obligation to report, and you don't—" She kept her voice level. "Do to me what you were planning to do to him." Silence. One of the men shifted his weight. The umbrella dripped on the hallway carpet. Matteo Voss looked at Briar Ellison for a long moment. She didn't look away. She had stood in resuscitation bays with her hands inside people's chests, and she had not looked away then either. This was not the same thing, but the part of her nervous system that dealt with high-stakes information processing did not particularly care about category distinctions. "I'll think about it," Matteo said. "You'll decide tonight," Briar said. "Because you came here tonight for a reason, and walking away without a resolution isn't consistent with why you came. If you wanted to think about it, you would have sent someone else." Matteo tilted his head. Something crossed his face that she couldn't fully read. Not quite amusement, not quite reassessment, something that existed in the space between the two. "Bring him inside," he said to his men. They brought Graham in. Briar stepped back and let them, watching the way her father moved, tracking. Left leg bearing more weight, shallow breathing, the tremor in the hands. She needed to look at that eye. She needed to know if there was anything behind the swelling that required attention before the adrenaline wore off. The 2 men deposited Graham on her couch like furniture and stood back. Matteo came in last. He didn't remove his coat. He stood in the middle of her small living room and looked at the bookshelves and the medical journals and the photo on the shelf above the television, and she watched him take in the apartment the way he'd taken in the hallway, not intrusively, just accurately. "Ice pack," she said to neither of the men in particular, moving to the kitchen. One of them didn't move. The other one, after a beat, went to the kitchen and started opening cabinets. "Freezer," she said. He found it. She wrapped the ice pack in a dish towel and brought it to her father. Graham took it without looking at her. He pressed it to his eye and slumped against the back of the couch, and for a moment he looked very much like what he was, an old man who had made decisions that had caught up with him and found, on arrival, that they were heavier than he'd calculated. 14 months, Briar said quietly, crouched in front of him, checking his pupils with her thumb. And the overhead light. "You were borrowing from him for 14 months. I was going to fix it. You've been going to fix it since I was 17 years old." His good eye met hers. Something moved through it. Shame, old and tired and very familiar. "I know. Don't talk right now. Track my finger." He tracked her finger. Pupils equal and reactive. She checked the split lip. Superficial. No sutures needed. She moved his jaw gently, checking for fracture. He He winced, but it was muscular, not structural. Behind her, she heard Matteo speaking quietly to his men. She didn't turn around. "He needs to rest," she said loudly enough for the room. "Whatever else happens tonight, he needs to be horizontal for the next several hours, and he needs water, not bourbon." "He can go," Matteo said, "once we've settled the terms." Breyer stood and turned. Matteo was sitting. He'd taken the armchair across from the couch, her armchair, the one she'd had since her second year of nursing school, and he sat in it like he'd always sat in it, one arm on the rest, completely still. "The terms," she said. "You come to the estate. You live on site. There's a guest wing. You have your own space. You function as medical consultant to my household and staff. Availability on call during operational periods, which are unpredictable. The debt reduces at a rate we negotiate. I'll have my accountant model it, but I'm thinking 2 years to clear it with standard service, faster with exceptional service. Define exceptional. I'll know it when it happens. That's not a definition, that's a mood." His mouth moved again. That almost smile that she was beginning to understand was his version of a laugh. 2 years with a baseline reduction schedule. Accelerator clauses to be defined in writing. I want the contract in writing. Obviously. I want a lawyer to review it, my own lawyer, not yours. That's fair. She had not expected him to say that. She kept her face even. I want access to my own transportation. I'm not a prisoner. I can leave the estate for personal appointments without requesting permission. With notification. Not permission, notification. Fine. You don't treat anyone outside my household without my authorization. That's a patient autonomy issue. It's a security issue. I'm not asking you to refuse care. I'm asking you to inform me before you become the private physician to someone in a competing organization. She thought about that. Agreed, with the caveat that emergency care is emergency care, and I don't call you before I stabilize someone. Agreed. They looked at each other. The rain was loud against the window. 2 years, she said. Roughly. The accountant will run the numbers. And my father goes home tonight. His debt transfers to the contract. If you fulfill the terms, it's cleared. If you breach the contract, he looked at her, not threatening, just factual. The original terms reapply. To him. To the debt, which originated with him. Breyer looked at her father. Graham was watching her with the expression of a man watching his daughter make a deal with the dark to buy back something he'd already sold. She had a feeling she was going to think about that expression for a long time. Okay, she said. Okay, Matteo said. I'll need 48 hours to arrange coverage at the hospital. I have patients who need to be handed off properly. I can give you 36. 48. I have a patient in post-surgical monitoring and I'm not walking out on her. He looked at her for 3 seconds. 48. She nodded once. One of the men, the one who had looked in the freezer, produced a phone and started typing. The other one was still standing near the door like he'd been placed there. Matteo stood, and standing, he was taller than she'd registered, and the coat made him larger, and for the first time since she'd opened the door, she felt the full weight of what she'd just agreed to settle somewhere in her chest. She didn't let it show. My father needs a car home, she said. He can't drive. Arranged. And whatever the medical bills are going to be from tonight, she looked at Graham's face, the dried blood, the swelling. I'm adding those to the contract as debits against the timeline. Matteo Voss looked at her. You're negotiating medical bills for damage my people caused while negotiating a contract about the debt that caused the damage. Yes? Most people don't do that. Most people aren't negotiating for my position at midnight. She held his gaze. Those are my terms. The silence ran out about 4 seconds. Fine, Matteo said. She walked her father out. At the elevator, Graham grabbed her arm. His grip was stronger than she expected. The grip of the man he used to be, surfacing through the wreckage of the one he'd become. You didn't have to, he said. I know. Breyer, this isn't... You don't know what you're walking into. I know what I'm walking away from if I don't. She looked at him. His face, under the fluorescent hallway light, was something she was going to have to learn to live with. Not the bruises would heal, but the expression underneath them. The knowledge of what his daughter had just done to preserve what was left of his life. Go home, drink water, ice the eye every 20 minutes for the first 2 hours, then as needed. If the headache gets bad or your vision changes, call 911 and do not wait on me. I'm so sorry. I know. She kissed his forehead, brief, precise, the way she did everything. Don't gamble. Not a scratch card. Not a fantasy league. Nothing. If you touch any of it while I'm in there working this off, the deal doesn't cover you anymore. Understood? Graham Ellison closed his eye, nodded. She watched the elevator take him down. When she came back into the apartment, Mateo's two men were waiting in the hallway. Mateo was standing at the window, looking out at the rain and the orange-smeared street below, his back to the room. "Why'd you look at the photograph?" she said. He turned. "What?" "When you came in. You looked at the photo on the shelf. You were reading the apartment, which is fine. That's what I'd do too in an unfamiliar space. But you stopped at the photograph." He was quiet for a moment. "Your father talks about you. He talks about everyone. It's one of his problems. He talks about you specifically. He said—" Mateo paused, and something in the pause was different from the preceding hour, fractionally softer at the edges. He said his daughter was the one good decision he ever made. Breyer didn't say anything. "I wanted to see if the description matched," Mateo said. "And does it?" He looked at her. "I'll have the contract drafted by morning. Someone will call you with the details." He moved toward the door. His men fell in behind him with the fluid automatic quality of long practice. "Voss?" He stopped. Looked back. "The two men on your payroll with the umbrella," she said. "The one on the left is carrying something wrong in his right shoulder. He's been compensating for it all night, yum. You can see it in how he held the umbrella and how he moved through the door. Rotator cuff, probably partial tear. He hasn't said anything because men in his position don't say anything." Mateo looked at the man in question. The man, to his credit, kept his face completely neutral. "He'll lose full function in that arm if he doesn't address it," Breyer said. "Could be surgery, could be aggressive physical therapy if it's caught early enough. But untreated, it'll deteriorate, and a man with a compromised dominant arm is a liability in whatever work he does for you." Mateo looked at the man for another moment. Then he looked back at Breyer. 36 hours, he said. 48. We agreed. 48, he confirmed, and left. She stood in her apartment and listened to their footsteps go down the hallway and disappear. The kettle had long since boiled and gone cold. She went to the kitchen and poured the water out and put the kettle back on and stood at the counter and looked at the wall and thought about what she had just done with the specific clear-eyed precision she usually reserved for triage assessments. She had agreed to enter Mateo Voss's household. She had agreed to live on his estate, to treat his people, to keep his secrets within the bounds of the contract for a period of approximately 2 years. She had traded herself, say, not her body, not her autonomy, not her dignity, but her time and her skill and her proximity, for a man who had spent the last 14 months demonstrating in very concrete terms that he was not capable of protecting himself. She did not feel heroic. Heroism was a story you told about choices after the fact, once you knew how they ended. Right now, she felt the particular dry-mouthed clarity of someone who is committed to a course of action and is now on the other side of the decision, in the territory where consequences lived. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number, a text message. Contract delivered electronically by 6 a.m. The appointment with your own counsel is already arranged. 11 a.m., Wednesday. My accountant is copied on the chain. She stared at it. He'd arranged her lawyer appointment before she'd asked for one. Before she'd even said yes, probably. He'd walked into her hallway at midnight with a lawyer already in his back pocket for her, which meant he'd anticipated the negotiation, or at least some version of it, which meant he'd done his research on her the way she did research on him, quietly and in advance. She should have found that alarming. She found it, instead, clarifying. She set the phone down and made the tea and sat at the kitchen counter in her scrub socks with the rain loud against the glass and thought about the next 48 hours. What needed to be handed off at the hospital, what she needed to pack, what she needed to say to the 3 people in her life who would notice she'd gone. And underneath all of it, running like a low current, was the memory of Graham's face at the elevator, the grip of his hand on her arm, the voice of a man who had gambled away $5 million and his own integrity and nearly his life, telling her she didn't have to. She drank her tea. She had not done this because she had to. She'd had options. She could have called the police, and her father would have been dead before they answered, and she knew it. She could have refused to open the door, and they would have been back, and the negotiating position would have been worse, and she knew that too. She could have offered anything else. Money she didn't have, promises she couldn't keep, the kind of desperate performance that men like Graham Ellison gave, and men like Mafia Boss had seen 1,000 times. She had done it because when she looked at her father's eye, she had understood, with the flat certainty she only got when the diagnosis was conclusive, that Graham Ellison would not survive a resolution that didn't involve her. Not physically, maybe not physically, but the man her father had once been. The man in the photograph at Navy Pier, the man who had taught her to read a weather map and cook a roux and check her oil and never let anyone see the moment she doubted herself. That man would not survive watching his daughter do nothing while his debt was settled in his blood. She was doing it for herself as much as for him. She understood that. She was doing it because there was a version of the future in which she spent the rest of her life knowing she had the skill to intervene and chose not to, and that version was not one she was willing to occupy. That didn't make it safe. She finished the tea, rinsed the mug, went to bed. She lay in the dark and listened to the rain, and thought about what Mafia Boss had looked like standing in her kitchen hallway with his coat still on. The way he'd held himself, still and controlled and quietly dangerous, like something with its weight distributed very carefully, nothing wasted, nothing on the surface that wasn't placed there deliberately. She thought about the almost smile. She thought about 36 hours, and then 48, and the tiny concession in that exchange that she was not sure she should read anything into, but that she had noticed, despite herself, with the same involuntary precision she noticed everything. She was not afraid. Or rather, she was afraid, but the fear was data, not noise. She'd been afraid in the OR during her first unassisted resuscitation. She'd been afraid during the stadium crush 3 years ago when she'd triaged 47 patients in 6 hours with 2 nurses and a paramedic. Fear didn't mean stop. Fear meant pay attention. She was going to pay attention. She set her alarm for 5:30 and closed her eyes, and the rain kept on, steady and indifferent. And somewhere across the city, Mafia Boss was in a car moving through the wet streets back to whatever his life looked like from the inside. And Briar Ellison was about to find out. 48 hours. She slept. She handed off her last patient at noon on the second day, a 44-year-old post-cardiac surgery patient named Diane, who had spent 3 days being difficult and demanding and scared, which Briar respected, because scared people who made noise got better outcomes than scared people who went quiet. "My replacement is excellent," Briar told her. "She's more patient than I am, which is good for you." "Are you coming back?" Diane said. "I'm going to a different position for a while." "That's not an answer." "No," Briar said. "It's not." She cleared her locker, signed the last of her paperwork, said goodbye to the charge nurse and 2 of the third-shift techs and the woman at the pharmacy window who had been sliding her coffee for 2 years without being asked. She did not make a production of it. She did not explain. She picked up her bag and walked out through the ER bay. Not the main entrance, the ER bay, the way she always went out, past the ambulance dock and the yellow line on the pavement, and the smell of antiseptic and diesel that was so deeply woven into the fabric of how she experienced the world that she sometimes smelled it when she wasn't there. A black car was waiting on the street. Not Mateo. A driver. Young, professional, the kind of face that didn't register in memory. He put her bag in the trunk without being asked. She got in. The drive north took 40 minutes through afternoon traffic. She watched Chicago go by the window, the neighborhoods changing register as they moved, the loose, dense energy of the city tightening into the cleaner, quieter geometry of the North Shore. And she felt the shift in her own chest, the place where the last 2 days of logistics and handoffs and deliberate forward motion had held everything else at bay, beginning to resolve into something more immediate. The estate was behind a gate on a tree-lined street that didn't announce itself. Brick, old money aesthetics, nothing ostentatious. The grounds were large and well kept, and as the car came up the drive, she could see a second building to the east of the main house. Lower, newer, a different architecture. "What's that building?" she said to the driver. "Medical facility," he said, "for the staff." She looked at it. There it was. The car stopped at the main entrance. The door opened before she reached it. Not a butler, a man she recognized as one of the 2 from her hallway, the one without the shoulder problem. He looked at her with the expression of a professional who had been told to be courteous and was executing the instruction competently. "Ms. Ellison, I'm Roman." "You're the one who found the ice pack," she said. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. "This way." She followed him inside. The house was... She registered it without letting the registration become anything as unguarded as reaction. Significant. High ceilings, old plaster and newer light. Art that was not decorative but chosen. The kind of art that reflected what a person thought about rather than what they wanted visitors to see. Clean lines, nothing fussy, nothing that performed wealth for an audience. She was being walked through a house that told her things about the man who lived in it, and she was going to be living in this house for the next 2 years. And she made a decision, walking those first 30 feet past the entrance hall, that she would look at everything and register nothing and keep her own counsel until she understood the full shape of what she'd entered. Roman brought her to the guest wing. 2 rooms, a bathroom, a small sitting area, a window facing the garden. Clean, spare, not impersonal. Someone had left a vase of something on the table by the window. Not flowers exactly, something greener and less performative. "Dinner is at 7, Roman said. "Mr. Voss would like to speak with you beforehand if you're available." "What time?" 6. "Fine." She set her bag down, looked at the room, looked at the window. "Is there anything you need?" Roman said. "I'd like to see the medical facility before 6. "I'll arrange it. Now, if possible." A pause. "I'll check." He left. Breyer stood in the room that was going to be hers for 2 years and looked at the garden outside the window. Ordered, geometric, the kind of garden that was maintained rather than grown, and thought about Diane in her hospital bed, probably already interrogating the new nurse, and her father in his apartment with ice on his eye, and the contract that her lawyer had reviewed with a mixture of professional thoroughness and barely concealed personal alarm. The contract was, her lawyer had said, extremely specific, more specific than these arrangements usually were. The debt reduction schedule was real, the accelerator clauses were real, the protections were real and enforceable. It was not the contract of a man who intended to trap her. It was the contract of a man who had thought carefully about what she'd asked for and given it to her in a form that held up. That scared her more, in some ways, than the alternative would have. Roman reappeared in the doorway. "The facility director can see you now." Breyer picked up her bag. She was not a prisoner. She was not a refugee. She was not her father, standing in the rain outside this house with nothing left to offer. She was a trauma nurse with 10 years of the hardest kind of experience there was, and she had negotiated her own terms, and she was here because she had chosen to be here. And for the next 2 years, she was going to do her job with the same precision and controlled ferocity she brought to every other thing she'd ever done. Whatever else this place was, whatever else Matteo Voss was, she would figure that out. She walked out of the room and down the hall toward the medical building, and the estate was very quiet around her, and somewhere in the main house she could hear, very faintly, the sound of a man on a phone call, speaking in a low-clipped voice, and the words were inaudible, but the tone was not. The tone was the tone of a man making decisions that other men would have to live with. She kept walking. Behind her, she heard a door open, then close. She did not look back. The medical facility smelled right. That was the first thing Breyer registered, and it mattered more than the square footage or the equipment inventory or the fact that the ceiling was higher than any private clinic she'd worked in. It smelled like antiseptic and clean linen, and the particular sterile nothing of a room that was maintained properly. Not the aggressive chemical overlay of a place trying to cover something up, but the quiet, neutral smell of a space that was actually clean. She stood in the doorway and let her eyes do the work before her feet did. 2 treatment bays, curtained. A surgical suite behind glass at the far end, small but real, with a light rig that cost more than her car. A supply room to the left, door open, shelves organized with a precision that suggested either a very disciplined staff or someone with a controlling personality managing the inventory. Monitoring equipment current within the last 3 years. A crash cart by the near wall, the seal on the drug tray intact and dated 2 months ago. Someone was running this place seriously. Ms. Ellison. The woman who came out of the supply room was in her 50s, short, with close-cropped gray hair, and the build of someone who had spent decades on her feet. She moved with the economic efficiency of a person who had long ago stopped wasting motion. "Dr. Shen," the woman said, extending her hand. "I run the facility." Breyer shook it. The grip was firm, quick, released without ceremony. Briar Ellison, trauma. I know. Mercy General, 10 years. Your record is thorough. Shen said it neutrally, which meant she had read it carefully. Yours? Northwestern, 20 years surgical, last 8 here. She said here without inflection, without the slightly defensive weight people sometimes put on things they expected to be judged for. Briar respected that. How many staff? Myself, 2 nurses, 1 anesthesiologist on call. We don't do elective work, we do, Shen paused, precise. Acute care. Trauma. Predominantly. GSWs. Frequently. Briar walked to the near treatment bay and pushed the curtain back. Clean. Supplies accessible. The IV setup was organized left to right in the order you'd reach for things in a rapid access situation. Someone had thought about workflow rather than just aesthetics. Who organized the supply order? She said. I did. It's good. Shen looked at her without expression. I know. Briar almost smiled. We're going to get along fine. Possibly? Shen folded her arms. You should know something about the way this facility works before you make that determination. The men who come through here don't always want to be treated. They come because Mr. Voss requires them to be treated. That creates a specific dynamic. I've worked with uncooperative patients before. Not like these. These are men who consider pain a private matter and medical attention a sign of weakness. And they will obstruct treatment, give you incorrect information, and in some cases physically resist examination. Not out of malice, out of habit. Briar looked at her. What happened to the last person who had my position? A beat. He left. Why? He asked a patient what had caused a particular injury. The patient took exception to the question. Was the patient's exception physical? Briefly, Briar processed this. So the working rule is I treat what I can see and I don't ask about causation unless it's clinically necessary. That's the working rule. You'll learn to read what happened from the presentation. You won't need to ask. I don't ask anyway, Briar said. In a trauma bay, you don't have time to ask. You assess and you act. She let her eyes move over the surgical suite glass. I want to do a full inventory tomorrow. I want to know what we have and what we don't have, and I want a list of whatever's been requested and not ordered. Shen's expression shifted by approximately 2 degrees in a direction that might have been approval. I'll have it ready. Thank you. Briar looked at her watch. Roman's taking me to see Voss at 6. Anything I should know about that conversation before I walk in? Shen looked at her for a moment. He doesn't waste time. Neither do I. Then you'll be fine, Shen said, and went back into the supply room. The room Mateo used for conversations like this one, conversations that weren't the kind you had at a dinner table or across an office desk, was on the ground floor of the main house, facing the east garden. Not a study, exactly. No desk, a table, 4 chairs, a sideboard with glass and a decanter he didn't offer from unless he was relaxed. And he was not yet relaxed. He was standing when Roman brought Briar in, standing at the window, looking at the garden, which had gone gray and dim in the late afternoon. He heard her come in, and he didn't turn immediately. Not a power move. He simply finished the thought he was in the middle of before changing states. He'd learned that from his father, one of the very few useful things, and he'd kept it long after he'd discarded everything else the man had given him. He turned. She had changed out of the scrubs. Dark slacks, a gray shirt, her hair down. She'd worn it up at the hospital. He'd seen the photographs, and down it was different. Not softer exactly, just less structured, which told him something about how she categorized this meeting. Not clinical, not entirely personal. Somewhere in between. How's the facility? He said. Better than I expected. She sat down without being invited to, which he noted. Dr. Shen is excellent. She is. The surgical suite is underlighted for complex procedures. I'll need to address that. Talk to Roman. He handles the facility budget. I will. She put her hands on the table, not folded, just resting. What did you want to talk about? House rules, Mateo said. He came away from the window and sat across from her. Not the contract. Those are legal parameters. These are operational. All right. You don't go into the East Wing without being invited. That's where I work. It's not about hiding things from you, so you'll see plenty. It's about the men who come and go having reasonable expectations about who's in the room. Understood. You don't discuss what you hear at this house with anyone outside it. Not your father, so I know you'll see him. Not former colleagues, not anyone. Medical details of the men you treat stay in the facility. Medical confidentiality is already a professional obligation. I don't need a house rule for it. I know, I'm saying it so the men who come through the facility know you've been told. It changes how they behave with you. She thought about that, nodded. If you have a problem with how something is done here, you bring it to me directly. Not to Roman, not to anyone else. Me. And if the problem is with you, he looked at her, then you bring it to me directly. She held his gaze. Okay. Questions. 1. She leaned forward slightly, not aggressive, just precise. The man with the shoulder, your man, did you have it looked at? Something moved in Mateo's chest that he didn't examine. Leo saw Shen this morning. And? Partial tear, as you said. She's treating it conservatively first. Good. Breyer sat back. That was a fast call. You were right about the liability. He paused. You were right about several things. I usually am about physical presentations. It's the only area of my life where I'm reliably correct. He almost said I doubt that, and stopped himself because the almost comfortable register of the exchange was something to be careful about. He had learned, the same way he'd learned most things through damage, that the people who unsettled his thinking were more dangerous to him than the people who pointed guns at him, because he knew how to manage a gun, and he was less certain about the other kind of threat. Dinner is at 7, he said. You'll eat with the household. I don't run a formal table. It's not that kind of place. What kind of place is it? Functional, he said. People who work here eat here. Some of them live here. There are 12 people on site on any given day, and the number changes. You'll learn who they are. Are any of them injured or undertreated? He looked at her. Probably. Then I'll find out at dinner. He watched her stand, push the chair back, straighten without looking at it the way people did when they were trying to appear composed. She was composed. The straightening was just mechanical. Voss? She said. Mateo. She looked at him. The correction landed between them and sat there. Mateo? She said. Not warmly, not coldly. Factually, the way she seemed to do everything. My father called me this morning. I know, I had Roman check. You're monitoring his calls. I'm monitoring the line I gave him, for his protection as much as mine. She held very still for a moment. He watched the calculation run across her face. Not emotion, not yet, just the rapid triage of information. The calls are logged, she said. Yes. Not recorded. Logged. Times and numbers, not content. I want that in writing. I'll have it added to the contract. She looked at him for a long moment. Thank you for telling me. He hadn't planned to. He'd decided, walking back from the window, that she would find out eventually, and that finding out from him was strategically better than finding out from another source. But it hadn't felt strategic when he said it. He did not examine that either. 7 o'clock, he said. She left. Dinner was not what she'd expected, which was beginning to be a theme. The kitchen table was large and utilitarian, and there were 9 people around it. Roman, 2 men she hadn't met, a woman in her 30s with close-cropped hair and a forearm brace that Breyer clocked immediately, Dr. Shen, a logistics coordinator named Paul, who talked with his hands, and 2 others who were introduced by first name only, and who ate in the manner of people focused on refueling rather than socializing. Mateo sat at the end of the table and ate and spoke when spoken to and asked 3 questions of the room across the course of the meal, each of which generated 5 minutes of direct operational discussion before the thread was resolved and dropped. No performance, no ceremony. The table ran like a briefing that happened to involve pasta. Breyer ate and observed. The woman with the forearm brace was favoring her left shoulder too. The brace was for a wrist injury, visible and acknowledged, but the shoulder issue was compensatory and newer, and she was rotating it slightly when she reached for things, trying to disguise the range restriction. 2 of the men had the caloric intake of people recovering from physical trauma, eating past hunger, efficiently, more protein than carbs. One of them had a slight tremor in his left hand that he controlled by keeping the hand flat on the table except when he needed it. After dinner, when the table was clearing, Breyer touched the woman's elbow. "Left shoulder," she said quietly. "When did it start?" The woman, her name was Kara, she'd been introduced as security operations, looked at her with the flat defensive expression of someone not accustomed to being noticed. 3 weeks ago, Kara said. "What happened?" A pause. "Work." "Of course." Breyer kept her voice neutral. "Come by the facility tomorrow morning, before 9 if you can." Kara looked at her for a moment, then nodded once and walked away. Roman appeared at Breyer's elbow. "You've been in the house 6 hours. Is that a problem?" "No," he said. Something in his tone was different from the courteous efficiency he'd shown earlier. Not quite warmth. Recognition, maybe. "Just an observation." She went to bed at 10 and lay in the dark of the room that was hers, but not hers, and listened to the estate settle and thought about what Shen had said. They come because Mr. Voss requires them to be treated. She thought about the way Roman had said just an observation and the way Matteo had told her about the call monitoring before she'd asked. She thought about the forearm brace and the shoulder and the man with the hand tremor and the way the table had functioned like a military unit that happened to love carbohydrates. She was not naive about what this place was. She had walked in with her eyes open about the industry of it, the debt collection and the leverage and the blood-soaked underside of the clean, legitimate businesses. She was not going to sentimentalize it, and she was not going to pretend she was somewhere she wasn't. But there was a specific texture to this household that she was still reading, and what she was finding was not what she'd expected to find, and she needed more data before she knew what to do with that. She slept. The first real test came on day 4. A car came through the gate at 11:40 at night. Breyer was still awake. She hadn't fully adjusted her sleep schedule yet, her body still running on hospital rhythms, and she heard it from her room, the crunch of gravel, the specific sound of a vehicle moving faster than the drive warranted. She was in the medical facility before Roman knocked on her door to tell her to come. 2 men, one walking, one not. The one walking had a gash above his eyebrow that needed sutures and a wrist that was wrong. Not broken, dislocated, she could see the displacement from across the room. The one not walking was being carried by 2 others, and he was conscious, barely, making the specific shallow sounds of someone managing pain by not engaging with it. Shen was already there, gloved, pulling the light over the second man. "GSW," Shen said. "Left flank. Entry, but I need imaging for exit." "Get the portable," Breyer said. She was already gloved, already moving to the conscious man on the table. "Talk to me," she said to him. He looked at her with the flat wariness she'd been told to expect. Young, mid-20s, dark hair matted with sweat. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're in shock and you're compensating. On a scale, I said I'm fine. I don't actually care what scale you put it on. I'm going to assess you whether you narrate it or not." She ran her hands down his torso. He flinched at the left side. "Did you take anything?" "What?" "Pain management. Did you take anything before you came here?" "No." "Good. That tells me where we actually are." She moved to the flank. No visible entry wound on the left, but there was bruising developing that wasn't incidental. "What hit you?" "Car door." "Moving." "Yeah." She pressed carefully. He made a sound through closed teeth. "Possible rib fracture, could be 2. I need an image." She looked up at the nurse, a young man named Dev who had appeared from somewhere and was already wheeling equipment. Portable chest x-ray, then hands. She moved to the man in the doorway. Walking wounded, wrist. "Sit." He sat. She examined the wrist with both hands, feeling the joint. Glenohumeral displacement, not as bad as it looked. The gash was bleeding freely, more dramatic than dangerous. "This is going to hurt," she said. "I know. Are you ready?" "Just..." She reduced the dislocation before he finished the sentence. He made a sharp, short sound and then went very still. "Done," she said. He stared at her. "The gash needs 4 sutures. I'll do it after I look at the image." She turned. "What's his name?" she said to the men who'd carried the second patient in. Neither of them answered. She looked at them. "I'm going to be putting things in his body based on his weight and medical history. His name isn't classified information. One of them, bigger, older, the one who'd been driving, said, Marco. Thank you. Marco. She moved back to Shen, who had the portable image up on the screen. They looked at it together. Entry wound left flank. The bullet had nicked the iliac crest and lodged against the posterior musculature. No organ involvement. Lucky. Dangerously lucky, given the location. He needs surgery, Shen said. He needs the bullet out, yes. What's his pressure? 88/60 and holding. Holding is good. Breyer looked at Marco's face, pale, sweating, jaw set. He was doing the work of staying conscious with visible effort. Marco, can you hear me? Yeah. Faint, determined. You're going to be all right. The bullet missed everything important. We're going to take it out, but first I need you stable. I need you to stop trying to manage the pain and let me manage it. Can you do that? He looked at her. The look lasted 3 seconds, and something in it shifted. Not surrender, not quite, but the specific unlocking of someone who has decided to extend provisional trust to a stranger. Yeah, he said. Good. Shen was already drawing up the medication. Breyer moved back to the man with the wrist. He was watching the surgical suite with the expression of someone doing calculations, and sutured the eyebrow gash in 4 clean passes. What's your name? She said. Felix. Felix, you have a possible rib fracture on your left side. I've ordered an image. When it comes back, if it's confirmed, I'm going to tape it and give you specific instructions about breathing exercises. You will follow those instructions. Or what? She looked at him. Or it heals wrong and causes you problems for the next 20 years. Your choice. She tied off the last suture. Don't touch the stitches. Matteo appeared at 1:15 in the morning. She was writing up Marco's post-operative notes. Shen had done the surgery, clean and fast, Breyer assisting, the bullet out in 40 minutes. And she looked up when the facility door opened and saw him in the doorway. He looked at Marco through the glass. Marco was sleeping, vitals steady on the monitor. Then he looked at Felix, who was in the recovery chair with his ribs taped and his wrist braced, asleep with his mouth open. Then he looked at Breyer. She was still in surgical gloves, her writing bloody at the fingertips where she'd pulled one glove partially off to hold the pen. She probably looked, she thought, exactly like what she was, someone who had been doing hard physical work for 2 hours straight. He'll be okay, she said. Marco. The bullet missed everything critical. Shen's work was clean. He needs 10 days of restricted movement and a course of antibiotics, which I'm going to make sure he actually takes. Matteo came in. He looked at the monitor, at the vitals, at the chart she'd started. He didn't touch anything. He was reading the room the way she'd been reading rooms all night. Felix, she said, 2 ribs, minor fracture on the lower left. He needs to breathe correctly or it becomes a complication. I've given him instructions. He'll follow them. He better. She pulled the glove off the rest of the way. Her hands were tired, that particular deep muscle fatigue of sustained, precise work. Can I ask you something? He looked at her. Ask? How often does a night like tonight happen? Often enough. I need a more specific answer than that for supply management purposes. He looked at the sleeping men and then back at her. Once or twice a month with significant injury, minor injuries, cuts, contusions, things that need attention but not surgery, more frequently. Once or twice a month with major trauma. She ran the math. I need to expand the blood supply. What we have is inadequate for sustained surgical intervention. I need a B negative in particular. I'm already down from tonight. Give Roman the list. I also need to talk to you about protocols. Right now, there's no triage protocol. Shen does what Shen does, which is excellent, but if we ever get multiple simultaneous arrivals, there's no established priority system. Then establish one. I need your authority to do it. The men who come through here, she paused, choosing the phrasing carefully. They need to understand the protocol comes from you, not from me. Otherwise, the first time I have to make a hard triage decision, I'm going to have someone in my face about it. Matteo looked at her for a long moment. She could hear the monitor beeping, steady and slow, Marco's heartbeat marking time in the quiet room. I'll tell Roman in the morning, he said. Your protocols are standing orders. Anyone who interferes with your medical judgment while you're treating a patient answers to me. Thank you. Don't thank me. It's practical. I know. She looked at him. He looked tired, not in the obvious way, not slumped or slack, but in the compressed way of someone who had been pushing weight for a long time and had gotten very good at hiding the effort. You were awake when they came in, she said. I'm usually awake. That's not a sustainable... She stopped herself. He almost smiled. You were about to give me health advice. I was about to overstep. Never mind. Finish it. She looked at him. Being chronically sleep-deprived impairs judgment in the same way that a blood alcohol level of 0.08 does. Whatever decisions you make at 1 in the morning after a month of inadequate sleep, you're making them impaired. That's not moral commentary, that's neurology. The room was quiet except for the monitor. How do you know I don't sleep? He said. The East Wing has lights on most nights after midnight. I can see it from my window. He looked at her. Something moved in his expression that she couldn't fully read. Not discomfort, not exactly, something more interior than that. I'll consider it, he said. That's not the same as doing it. No, he agreed. It's not. He looked at Marco one more time. Then he walked out of the facility, and she watched the door close behind him, and she stood in the clean antiseptic quiet with the monitor beeping, and the 2 sleeping men and the memory of Matteo Voss standing in the doorway reading the room she'd built in one night. And she felt, for the first time since she'd arrived, something she didn't immediately have a clinical category for. She filed it under data pending and went back to her notes. Day 9. The man's name was Rourke, and he arrived during the day for what Shen had flagged as a routine follow-up, except that Breyer could see from across the room that there was nothing routine about his presentation. He was moving carefully, too carefully, the deliberate conservation of someone managing something acute. He sat on the treatment table and looked at her with the specific expression she'd been warned about and had now seen enough times to read fluently. I don't want to be here. I'm here because I was told to be, and I'm not going to make this easy. How long? She said. How long what? The pain. How long has it been at this level? I'm not... It's fine. Your jaw is tight and you've been breathing at about 70% capacity since you sat down. I can see you deciding how much of each breath to take. That's pain management, not normal respiration. She looked at him. He was in his 40s, heavy set, with the layered scar tissue of someone who had taken significant damage across a long career. How long? A beat. Week and a half. What happened? Work. Right flank, the way you're favoring it. Did someone hit you or did you fall? His jaw tightened. Does it matter? For treatment? Sometimes. For my report to Matteo? No, I don't report clinical details. That's not how this works. She waited. I'm trying to figure out if there's internal bleeding I need to worry about or if this is musculoskeletal and I can manage it differently. That's the only reason I'm asking. Rourke looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that was an assessment. Reading her the way she was reading him, deciding whether the words matched the situation. Got hit, he said finally. Came down on a corner. Metal. Did you lose consciousness? Briefly. She kept her voice level. I need to image this. If there's any bleeding, there's no... You can't know that. That's the point. She looked at him directly. You've been walking around for a week and a half with potential internal trauma because you didn't want to come in. I understand why. I'm not judging the reasoning. I'm telling you the cost-benefit analysis is wrong, because if there is something happening in there and it ruptures, you won't get a second chance to change your mind about treatment. Rourke's expression shifted. Not warmth, not gratitude. Something more basic. The expression of a man being given an accurate assessment by someone who isn't going to use it against him. Okay, he said. She imaged him. There was a small subcapsular hematoma on the liver, old enough that it was beginning to resolve, which meant his body had been managing it, which meant he had been extraordinarily lucky. She showed him the image. She explained what it was and what it meant, and what the difference between resolving and ruptured looked like on a scan, and she watched his face process the information. You're probably going to be fine, she said. The body is doing what it should, but I need to see you twice a week for the next 3 weeks to confirm the trend, and if you feel any sudden increase in pain or you get lightheaded, you come straight here. Not in a week, not tomorrow, immediately. Yeah. He looked at the scan. Okay. She walked him through the follow-up instructions. He listened the way men in his position listened, not taking notes, trusting his memory, but genuinely listening, which she'd learned was not always a given. At the door he stopped, didn't look back. "The thing you said," he said, "about not reporting to Voss. I don't report clinical details, yes. He knows you're treating me. He knows you came in for a follow-up. He doesn't know what I found." Rourke was quiet for a moment. "Most people who work for him," he said slowly, "they report everything." "I'm not working for him," Breyer said. "I'm working for you. While you're in this room, you're my patient. That's the only relevant fact." He looked at her over his shoulder then. Something in his face she couldn't name. Not quite gratitude, something older than that. Something that had to do with being seen accurately and not used. He left. Day 14. Matteo found her in the garden at 7 in the morning, which was the only time she went to the garden because it was the only time it was quiet. She sat on the stone bench near the eastern hedge and drank her coffee and read, and it was the closest thing to a version of herself she recognized. He came out of the side door and walked toward her and didn't stop, which told her he'd seen her and decided to approach rather than turning back, which was a choice. "I didn't know you used the garden," he said. "It's 7 in the morning. I assume no one else did." He looked at her coffee, looked at the book. She had closed it when she heard his footsteps, a reflex. "What are you reading?" She held it up. A clinical text on traumatic brain injury, which was not light reading, and she didn't pretend otherwise. "Is that for work or for pleasure?" he said. "Both. They're usually the same." He looked at the bench and then at the space beside her on it. He did not sit. He stood near the hedge with his hands in the pockets of his coat, a different coat than the one from her hallway, but the same posture, the same quality of stillness. "Rourke came in yesterday," he said. "He had a scheduled follow-up. He told me." He looked at the garden, the ordered rows, the geometry of it. He said, and this surprised me, that he's going to keep coming in, voluntarily. Good. He hasn't done that before, voluntarily. She looked at her coffee cup. Then whoever was handling his care before wasn't making the value clear. Or they were making him feel like a liability to be managed. She looked up. Matteo was looking at her. The morning light was different from the artificial light of the hallway or the facility. It was flatter, more even, and in it he looked like a version of himself with some of the controls stripped back. Not vulnerable, just real, in the specific way that people were real when they were outside before they'd put their performance on. "That's not what you do," he said. "You make them feel like they're worth the effort. They are worth the effort. That's not a technique, it's just accurate. Some of them..." He stopped. "Some of them have done things that make the value easier to question," she said, finishing the thought he hadn't. "I know. I'm not naive about what they do when they leave this facility, but that's not my department. My department is the 40 minutes they're in the room with me." She looked at him. "You don't have to tell me my patients are worth saving. That's already my operating premise." The silence stretched out between them, not uncomfortable. A bird was working at something in the hedge. The light was coming up slowly over the east wall. "You're changing things," he said. "I'm doing my job." "You're doing more than your job." He said it without accusation, without warmth, just accurately. "The facility runs differently than it did. The men talk to Shen now. They didn't before. They come in on schedule. Kara's shoulder is improving." A pause. "Marco asked about you yesterday. How is he?" "Eating too much and complaining about bed rest, which I'm told is a good sign." "It is." She almost smiled. "Tell him 3 more days of restricted movement and then light activity only. If he pushes it before 3 days, I will know." "How will you know?" "Because I'll image him and I'll see it." He looked at her. "You'd actually do that." "I absolutely would." He was quiet for a moment. And then, without any particular ceremony, he sat down on the other end of the bench. Not close. Appropriate distance, the distance of people who were still reading the parameters of a new kind of proximity. He looked at the garden. She looked at the garden. "My father built this," he said. "The garden." He was very concerned with order. She didn't ask about the father. She understood from tone alone that it was a complicated subject, and she didn't push. "It's well maintained," she said. I kept it for operational reasons. A maintained garden suggests a stable household. He said it without humor, just factually. It took me longer than it should have to realize I'd also kept it because... He stopped. Because, she said, because something he built being intact felt different from everything else he left behind. She held her coffee cup and looked at the garden and said nothing, because it wasn't the moment for words, and she'd learned that too. When information was being offered in a particular way, it needed space, not response. They sat there for a while. The light kept coming up. I need to be at the facility at 8, she said eventually. I know. She stood, picked up her book, looked at him. He was still looking at the garden, the stone bench framing him in the early light, and she thought briefly that he was the most controlled person she had ever been in proximity to, and that control of that quality always had cost something to build. She went inside. It was day 16 when she heard the name for the first time. She heard it from Felix, who had come back in for his final rib check and had stayed to drink the coffee from the facility's ancient machine, which was not good coffee, but which Felix apparently didn't care about. Vincetti's people were in the city yesterday, Felix said. Not to her exactly. To the room. She had learned that some of the men talked this way, not expecting response, just processing aloud. She said, not looking up from the chart. The dinner's in 3 weeks. Boss doesn't want it, but Vincetti's been pushing. She said nothing. Last time there was a peace dinner, Felix said, and then stopped. She looked up. Felix had the expression of a man who had said more than he meant to. He looked at his coffee. Nothing, he said. Okay, she said, and went back to the chart. But later, much later, lying in the room with the light off and the estate quiet, she thought about the way he'd stopped, the word last time hanging there unfinished like a sentence that already knew its own ending. She was beginning to understand that there were things in this household that had happened before she arrived. Layers of history under the operational present, and she was living on the surface of something deep, and she did not yet know how deep, and she was going to need to know. She turned on her side and looked at the dark. 3 weeks to the dinner. She had a feeling, not medical intuition, the other kind, the kind she'd developed in places where the ambient danger was high and the information was incomplete, that the dinner was going to change something. She just didn't know yet what she was going to be standing in the middle of when the peace dinner was held on a Friday. Breyer knew it was happening because the estate changed register 3 days beforehand, the kind of change you felt before you saw it, a tightening in the way people moved through the halls, conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the specific silence of people managing information around someone they hadn't yet fully decided to include. Roman was on his phone more. Matteo was in the East Wing for 16-hour stretches. Kara stopped coming to the garden at dusk, which had become a quiet habit over the previous week, and instead stood post at the East Gate with 2 men Breyer hadn't seen before. She treated a sprained wrist and a laceration on day 17, and a case of what turned out to be stress-induced hypertension on day 18. She did not ask questions about the dinner. She stocked the facility to capacity, ordered the blood supply she'd requisitioned, ran through the crash cart twice. She was not, she told herself, preparing for casualties. She was maintaining standard readiness. She was preparing for casualties. The dinner was at 8. Breyer was not invited, which she had expected and which she was fine with because she needed to be near the facility, not at a table she didn't understand. She ate alone in the kitchen at 7 and listened to the sound of the house getting dressed for the night. Doors, footsteps, the low voices of men coordinating, the sound of a car coming through the gate, and then another. At 8:15, she went to the facility and sat at the desk and read. At 9:42, she heard the sound she'd been trained, somewhere deep in her nervous system, to respond to immediately. A sharp impact, not quite a gunshot, something heavier, and then voices, multiple voices, coming fast. She was gloved and at the door before her brain had finished processing the sequence. Roman was running across the courtyard. Behind him, 2 men supporting a third. Behind them, from the direction of the main house, a sound like furniture, and then a voice she recognized as Matteo's. Not loud, not panicked, controlled, but with something underneath it that she had never heard in it before. "How many?" she said to Roman as they came through the door. 4 down, maybe 5. It happened fast." "Where?" "Dining room." Someone pulled a weapon during the dinner. Voss's men got most of it contained, but he stopped, looking at the man they were laying on the first table. She was already there. GSW to the upper chest, right side, which was better than left, but still not good. She ran her hands over the entry, checking for exit, finding it, through and through, which was better, clean trajectory, but the breathing was wrong. Tension pneumo, she said. Dev needle decompression, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular. She was already reaching. What's his name? Santos. Santos, I need you to stay with me. He was conscious, barely, eyes tracking. She felt the resistance of the needle going in, and then the rush of air in his breathing changed. Not fixed, but buying time. Get Shen, now! Dev was already calling. The door opened again. Felix, walking, holding his left arm at an angle that meant the shoulder was dislocated again, or newly damaged. She filed it. Behind him, a man she didn't know, a cut across his face that was bleeding heavily, but was not her immediate concern. Behind him, Matteo. He was not shot. She checked him in the 2 seconds she had before she turned back to Santos. No blood on the coat that wasn't someone else's, posture intact, moving fully, eyes sharp. Not injured. Furious. The specific controlled fury of a man containing something that wanted to be larger. Briar. His voice was even. Give me 10 minutes, she said. Don't talk to me for 10 minutes. He stopped. She didn't look to see his expression. She was working. Shen arrived in 4 minutes and took Santos into the surgical suite. Briar moved to the man with the facial laceration, assessed, sutured in 8 minutes while giving Felix instructions for the shoulder that he followed without comment. The second time they'd done this, the familiarity grim and strange. She triaged the fourth arrival, a man named Castillo with 2 broken fingers and a concussion she needed to monitor. She set the fingers, she ran the concussion protocol. She made Castillo sit in the recovery chair and follow her light and answer questions. She was aware of Matteo the entire time, standing near the wall, out of the way, watching. At 11:15, she stripped off her gloves and looked at him. Talk, she said. He came away from the wall. Vincetti's underboss, man named Dario Reyes, he pulled a weapon during a discussion about territory. My men responded. Reyes. Dead. His 2 associates are with their people. And yours. Santos is the worst. The others, he looked around the room at the men she'd treated, will recover. Santos will recover too, Briar said. Shen's good and it went through clean, but he needs a hospital in the next 6 hours for proper surgical follow-up. I can stabilize, but I can't do what an OR with full staff can do. Not possible. Matteo. Not tonight. Tomorrow. She looked at him. The look was not soft. If there's a complication overnight, then you handle it. That's why you're here. He said it flatly, not cruelly, just as fact, and she understood that there were constraints she wasn't seeing and that pushing wouldn't move them tonight. I'll monitor him every 30 minutes, she said. I know you will. She pulled her hair back. It had come loose during the work, and looked at the room. Felix was sitting with his arm in a new sling. Castillo was doing what she'd told him. The unnamed man with the sutured face had fallen asleep in the corner chair. Briar. Matteo's voice and something in the register of it made her look at him directly. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not the controlled assessment, not the almost smile. Something more stripped back than either, more honest in a way that looked like it had cost him something to let through. You didn't leave, he said. What? When it started, you could hear it from the facility. You could have locked the door and waited. She looked at him. No, she said simply. I couldn't. The room was quiet except for the monitors and Felix's breathing. Matteo looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, and left. She didn't sleep. Santos made it through the night. By 4 a.m., his pressure had stabilized into a range she trusted, and by 6, she had Roman arranging a discreet hospital transfer with a cover story she didn't ask about. She sat with Santos for the last hour, monitoring, and he woke up just before the car came and looked at her with the disoriented expression of someone piecing together a recent sequence of events. You're okay, she said. You're going to a hospital for follow-up. You'll be home in 3 days. He looked at her. His lips moved. Don't talk. Save it. She checked his pressure one more time, wrote the handoff note. Your brother called the estate last night. Roman told him you'd had an accident. He's meeting you at the hospital. Santos's eyes closed. Something moved through his face. Relief, maybe, or just exhaustion so complete it looked like relief. When they took him out, Briar went to the garden. It was early, barely light, and the air had the particular raw quality of a night that hadn't finished yet. She sat on the stone bench and looked at the ordered rows and let the previous 8 hours settle through her. She did this after every bad shift. Not processing, not emotional accounting, just letting the physical memory of the work settle before she put it away. Her hands were steady, they were always steady during. It was after that she felt it. The specific tremor of adrenaline that had nowhere left to go, very fine, barely visible. She pressed her palms flat on her thighs and waited for it to pass. She heard footsteps. Looked up. Mateo. Same coat, different clothes underneath, which meant he'd changed at some point during the night. He had 2 cups of coffee. He put one on the bench beside her without asking and sat at the other end. They didn't speak for a while. What was the dinner actually about? She said. He looked at the garden. Reyes wanted to renegotiate the northern boundary. He's been pushing into distribution territory that's been mine for 8 years. Was it going badly? It was going the way those conversations go. He drank his coffee. He made a calculation that pulling a weapon would give him leverage. He calculated wrong. People usually do with that particular approach. His voice was flat. Vincetti will distance himself from Reyes now. He'll send condolences. We'll have a secondary conversation in 2 weeks that pretends last night didn't happen. Does it ever actually resolve? He looked at her. Sometimes. Sometimes the territory dispute gets resolved, the tension drops, and there's a period of functional equilibrium. He paused. And sometimes it escalates. Which is this? He looked away. I don't know yet. She drank her coffee. A bird was doing something aggressive in the east hedge. The light was very slow coming up. I want to ask you something, he said. Ask? When you made the offer at your apartment, the contract, were you afraid? She thought about the question for a moment. Yes. Of me, of the situation, of what would happen if I didn't make the offer. She looked at her cup. Fear is information. It tells you the stakes are real. I was afraid because the stakes were real, and because I didn't know enough yet to assess the full risk. She looked at him. I still don't, fully. But you stayed. I said I would stay. That's not the same as... It's exactly the same, she said. For me, it is. He was quiet. The tremor in her hands had stopped. The light was up enough now to see the full geometry of the garden, every row, every deliberate line. Thank you, he said. For last night. You don't need to thank me. It's my job. I know what your job is. He looked at her, and it was the stripped-back expression again, the one that cost him something. I'm not thanking you for doing your job. I'm thanking you for running toward it. She held his gaze and said nothing, because she understood suddenly and with some precision that the thing she'd been filing under data pending had been accumulating into something that had a name, and the name was inconvenient, and she was going to need to be very careful about it. She stood. I'm going to sleep for 4 hours, and then I want to check Castillo's concussion again. I'll have food sent to your room. You don't have to... You've been awake for 26 hours. You'll eat. He said it the way she said things to patients, not a request, just a fact about how things were going to be. She almost argued, didn't. Fine, she said, and went inside. Okay. The revelation came on day 23, and it came from her father. Graham called in the afternoon, the monitored line, logged, but not recorded, which she knew and had made her peace with. She took the call in her room, sitting on the bed, still in her scrubs from the morning clinic. He sounded different. Not better. Different in the way people sounded when they had been carrying something and had finally made the decision, not to put it down, but to hand it to someone else. I need to tell you something, he said. I should have told you before. I should have told you months ago. She felt something tighten in her chest. Tell me. The debt. The $5 million. He stopped. It wasn't just gambling, Briar. She was very still. I was moving money, Graham said, for people. using the sports book as a conduit. I told myself I didn't know what the money was, but I knew. You know, when you decide not to know something, you still know it. His voice was unsteady. Not crying. Her father didn't cry, hadn't since she was a child, but fraying at the edges in a way that told her the words were costing him. The people I was moving it for, they were using Voss's infrastructure, his construction contracts, his hotels. They were running money through his operation without his knowledge. Marble Sam's words, she said. What people? Vincetti's organization, a financial arm, the man running it is named Caruso. He approached me 2 years ago. Graham's breathing was shallow. He told me it was consulting, that I was just facilitating transfers, that the risk was... He stopped. I believed what I wanted to believe. Briar pressed her hand flat against her own thigh, steadying. Dad, does Matteo know you were involved in Vincetti's financial operation? No. The word came out ragged. He knows I borrowed from him and lost it. He doesn't know why I needed the money. The gambling was... It was real, Briar. I'm not making that part up, but I was gambling to cover the losses from the other thing, the money I was supposed to move that went wrong. Stop. She needed him to stop so she could think. Stop talking for a second. Silence on the line. She could hear him breathing. Her mind was running the calculation with the flat, terrible efficiency it reserved for the worst kind of triage. Graham had been a conduit for Vincetti's financial operation. Vincetti's money had been running through Matteo's infrastructure without Matteo's knowledge. That meant there was a ledger somewhere. There was always a ledger that showed the movement of that money through Matteo's businesses. And if that ledger existed, it could be read as evidence that Matteo was complicit, that his operation was knowingly laundering money for a rival family, which meant it could be used against him, which meant whoever held it held leverage over everything. Dad, her voice came out very even. Who else knows what you were doing? Caruso, a few of his people, the men who approached me. Does anyone in Matteo's organization know? I don't think so. Unless... He stopped again. Unless what? Briar, the reason Caruso's people needed me is because I had access to the books. I did accounting work for some of Voss's legitimate businesses. Consulting, years ago. I still had access codes, old ones, for the hotel accounting systems. They used those to insert the transfers so they'd look internal. The room was very cold. She was still sitting on the bed in her scrubs, and the afternoon light was coming through the window at the low angle of late day, and she was in the middle of understanding something that had the specific terrible clarity of a diagnosis that explained every symptom at once. She was inside Matteo Voss's household. She had access. She had earned trust, real trust, the kind that had been building across 23 days of work and honesty and 4 a.m. coffee on a stone bench. And her father had been the instrument by which Vincetti's people had compromised Matteo's financial infrastructure. And she had come here as payment for that debt, which meant, if anyone looked at it from the right angle, she was already inside the walls. She already had proximity to Matteo, to his men, to his schedule, and his security, and his medical records. She hadn't been placed here as a prisoner or a resource. From the outside, from Vincetti's side, from Caruso's side, she looked exactly like an asset, a plant. The thought hit her with a physical force. She stood up off the bed. She needed to move. She went to the window and looked at the garden, the ordered rows, the deliberate lines, and pressed one hand against the glass and made herself breathe. She was not a plant. She had negotiated her own contract, under her own terms, with her own lawyer, and she had been doing her job with complete integrity for 23 days. She was not working for Vincetti. She had not come here to compromise anyone. But none of that mattered if it looked like she had. None of that mattered if Matteo found out about her father's accounting access, the access she hadn't known about, the access Graham had used as a backdoor for Vincetti's money, and connected the timeline, her father's debt, her father's position in the operation. Briar's arrival in the household, right after the dinner was announced, right before Vincetti's man pulled a weapon. She pressed her forehead against the glass. Briar, her father's voice, tinny from the phone she'd dropped on the bed. She went back and picked it up. I hear you, she said. I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't matter right now. She kept her voice level with effort that cost her. Does anyone know you called me about this? No. Don't call again from that line about this. Don't mention this to anyone. She thought hard. The access codes, are they still active? I don't know. I haven't used them in... Is there a way Caruso's people are still using them? Possibly. I gave them a list. I don't know how many they've accessed. She closed her eyes. Okay. She opened them. Don't panic. Don't do anything. Let me think. Briar, if Voss finds out, I know. He'll think you... I know. Her voice came out sharp. She pulled it back. I know what he'll think. I need to figure out what I'm going to do before that happens. She paused. Dad, if someone contacts you about this, anyone at all, you call me immediately on a different number. Do you understand? Yes. Not Roman, not Mateo. Me first. Okay. She hung up and stood in the middle of her room with the afternoon light coming through the glass and her heart rate doing something she would have flagged as clinically significant in a patient. She could leave. She could pack her bag right now and walk out through the front gate and call a cab and be gone before anyone had reason to stop her. The contract had a breach clause, but that was a civil matter, and given what she'd just learned about her father's involvement with Vincetti, a civil breach was the least of her problems. She could leave. She went to the window again, looked at the garden, looked at the medical building, its lights on in the late afternoon, Shen probably doing rounds, Dev probably restocking after yesterday's clinic. She thought about Marco asking about her, about Rourke coming in voluntarily for his follow-up, about Felix's shoulder and Santos through the night and Kara's recovery and the man with the hand tremor who had let her test his grip last week and said, afterward, with the particular quiet of someone saying something true that they didn't say often, that's the first time in 6 months that hasn't hurt. She thought about Mateo on the bench at 6 a.m, telling her his father built the garden, and the cost she'd heard in the telling. She was not going to leave. But she was also not naive enough to think she could manage this alone, and she was not going to lie by omission to a man who had told her the truth when he didn't have to, and she was not going to sit on information that could get people killed while she decided how to feel about it. She was going to tell him. She was going to walk into the East Wing, for the first time, uninvited, which was a house rule she was about to break. And she was going to tell Matteo Voss that her father had been running money for Vincetti's operation through the back door of his own financial infrastructure, and that her arrival in this house, however genuine its terms, could be read by every enemy he had as evidence that she was here to finish what her father started. She was going to tell him, and then she was going to stand in whatever came after that and not flinch. She picked up her phone. She set it down. She looked at herself in the mirror above the dresser. Scrubs, hair loose, the specific, exhausted clarity of a person who has just received a diagnosis they can't unfind. And she said to herself very quietly, the same thing she said in triage when the situation outran the resources, and you had to make a decision that had no good answer. Okay, what do we have to work with? She straightened. She walked to the door. She opened it. At the end of the hall, coming toward her with the quick stride of someone responding to new information, was Roman. His face was wrong, tight, too still, the expression of a man managing news he didn't want to be carrying. He stopped when he saw her. We need to go, he said. I need to talk to Mateo. So does he. Roman's voice was controlled and very careful. We found something in the financial audit, the one that started after the dinner. A pause. Brief, exact. The pause of a man choosing his words with surgical precision. Ms. Ellison. The access codes that were used to insert the Vincetti transfers into the hotel accounting system. He looked at her. They trace back to your father's consulting account. The hallway was very quiet, and Roman was still looking at her, and Briar understood. In the specific way she understood things that were happening too fast to process sequentially, that the next 30 seconds were going to determine the shape of everything that came after them. She could see it in Roman's face. Not accusation, not yet, but the tightened, careful expression of a man who had been given information and was watching her reaction to confirm or complicate it. He was reading her the way she read patients. She understood the dynamic because she lived in it. I know, she said. Roman went very still. I found out 40 minutes ago, she said. My father called. I was on my way to tell Matteo. She held Roman's gaze. I know how that sounds. It sounds... Roman stopped. Started again. It sounds like something I need to take you to him right now to explain. Then take me. He looked at her for 3 more seconds. Whatever calculation was running behind his eyes, it reached a conclusion. He turned. Come on. She followed him down the hall, past the guest wing, through the interior door she had not gone through before. The east wing was not dramatically different from the rest of the house. Same bones, higher ceilings in the main corridor, a different quality of quiet that had to do with use rather than architecture. This was a working space. The walls had boards with maps and schedules. A room to the left had 3 monitors running financial data. The smell was coffee and the specific dry warmth of a space where people spent long hours. Roman stopped outside a door at the end of the corridor. He knocked twice. Come in, Matteo's voice. Controlled. Flat. Roman opened the door and stood aside. Breyer went in. Matteo was standing at a table covered in documents, printed sheets, photographs, what looked like financial records printed in columns she recognized as accounting logs. 2 men she knew by face but not name flanked the table. Felix was against the wall with his arms crossed. Kara was near the window. Everyone looked at her when she entered. Matteo looked at her last. His face was the face she'd seen at her apartment door 23 days ago. Controlled, reading, nothing wasted on the surface. But there was something underneath it that had not been there that night. Something that looked, if she read it accurately, like the specific injury of a man who had extended something real and was now standing in a room full of evidence that it had been a mistake. She spoke before he could. My father was running transfers for Vincetti's financial operation through his old consulting access to your hotel accounting system, she said. He did it for 2 years. He used the sports book as a conduit and the access codes as a back door. He took money for it. He gambled most of the money he took. When the arrangement went wrong and the transfers were flagged internally, not publicly, internally, the debt accumulated, which is the $5 million you came to collect. She stopped. Let that land. I did not know about the transfers when I made the contract offer. I found out 40 minutes ago when he called me. I was walking to this room when Roman intercepted me in the hallway. The room was silent. Matteo had not moved. He was looking at her with an expression she could not fully read and did not look away from. That's everything I know, she said. I'm telling you because it's your operation and you have a right to the information, and because I won't sit on something this significant while people around me make decisions based on incomplete intelligence. She kept her voice level. Her hands were at her sides and she was holding them deliberately still. I understand what this looks like from where you're standing. Tell me what it looks like, Matteo said. His voice was very quiet. It looks like you came to collect a debt from a man who had been compromising your financial infrastructure for 2 years, and his daughter offered to come inside your household, and has spent 23 days building access and proximity and trust. She said it clean and direct, no hedging. It looks like placement. The 2 men at the table shifted. Felix uncrossed his arms. Is it? Matteo said. No. That's what a placed asset would say. Yes, she said. It is. I know that. She looked at him. I also know that a placed asset would not be standing in your east wing telling you about the access codes 40 minutes after learning about them. I would have used the information first. She paused. You know what I've been doing in that facility for 23 days. You know who I've treated and how. You know I had Santos stabilized through the night when leaving him would have been the correct move for someone trying to maintain her cover as a neutral party. You know about Rourke and the hematoma I found and didn't report to you because it was his clinical information, not yours. Mom, Matteo was still looking at her. I'm telling you now, she said, because it's the right thing to do. And because if Vincetti's people used my father to put a backdoor in your financials, the ledger of those transfers exists somewhere, and it shows your infrastructure processing their money, and that can be used to make every legitimate business you have look like knowing participation in their operation. She watched his face. Which means whoever holds the ledger holds your entire legal portfolio as leverage. The room breathed. Matteo moved. Not toward her. To the table. To the documents. He picked up one sheet, looked at it, put it down. He was doing what she'd watched him do the night of the dinner, containing something, compressing it into operational shape. The access codes, he said. Which systems? Hotel accounting. He said he gave them a list. He doesn't know which ones they accessed or how many. How long ago? He said 2 years of transfers. He doesn't know if the codes are still active. Mateo looked at the man nearest the monitors. Nolan. Lock every consulting tier access across all hotel systems. Tonight. Change every credential in the financial network. He looked at the second man. Get Carver on the phone. I need the full transaction history audited by morning. Not next week, by morning. He looked at Roman. Where's Caruso? Roman said, as of 2 hours ago, his last confirmed location was the Vincetti property on the North Shore. And our guest? A pause. Breyer looked at Roman. What guest? She said. Roman looked at Mateo. Mateo looked at her, and the thing she saw in his face then was not controlled. It was the expression of a man making a real-time calculation about how much truth to give a person standing at the center of a situation that had just become significantly more dangerous. Mateo, she said. Vincetti's financial director, he said. A man named Harlan Webb. He contacted us 6 hours ago requesting a private meeting. He says he has documentation about Caruso's operation that he wants to trade. Trade for what? Immunity from what comes next. She ran that through. He has the ledger. He says he has copies. Where is he? Under guard, East Annex. Does Vincetti know he's here? Not yet. Mateo looked at her steadily. That window is probably 3 hours. After that, Webb becomes a liability regardless of what he's offered us, because Vincetti will assume we've already gotten everything from him and will act accordingly. 3 hours. She did the math. You need to move before then. We need to move before then. She looked at him. What does that mean? Mateo picked up one of the photographs on the table and held it out to her. She took it. It was a surveillance image, low light, long lens, showing a freight terminal, industrial, somewhere near the waterfront. 2 men visible at the entrance. Webb's meeting request came with a condition, Mateo said. He wants the exchange to happen at a neutral location. His choice. He sent this address. That's not neutral, Felix said from the wall. That's a kill box. Probably, Mateo said. He looked at Breyer. Webb also sent a list of who he would and wouldn't meet with. He will not meet with my men. He says he has reason to believe every person on my operational team has been identified and photographed by Caruso's people, and that walking any of them into that building is the same as sending a signal. She stared at him. He wants me. He asked for the nurse. The room was very cold. He knows I'm here, she said. Caruso knows. Webb is Caruso's man. They've been watching the estate. Mateo's voice was even and stripped bare of anything that wasn't information. He saw you as a variable they didn't account for. He thinks you're leverage over me. A pause. He's not entirely wrong about the leverage. He is wrong about how it works. What does he think he can get from me? He thinks you'll broker the exchange because you have reason to want this resolved. The debt, your father, your own position here. Mateo set down the paper he was holding. He thinks you're an instrument. And you're telling me all of this, she said slowly, because you need to know if he's right. I'm telling you, Mateo said, because you told me about the access codes 40 minutes after learning about them, and because I need someone in that building tonight who can read a room fast and who Webb will accept at the door, and because... He stopped. The stop was not like his other stops. His other stops were controlled, deliberate. This one was involuntary, and she saw it, and she thought she understood what was inside it. Because you don't want to send me, she said. The room was very quiet. No, he said. I don't. She looked at the photograph in her hand, the freight terminal, the 2 men at the entrance, the specific darkness of a building designed to receive and contain. She thought about her father's voice on the phone, fraying at the edges. She thought about Santos breathing through the night. She thought about the ledger and the access codes and the 2 years of transfers running through Mateo's hotels and what it meant if that documentation ended up in the wrong hands or in a courtroom. She thought about the garden and the bench and the man who had told her his father built the rose. What do I need to know about Webb? She said. Mateo looked at her. Breyer, I'm going. She said it the same way she said everything, flat, precise, past the point of negotiation. Tell me about Webb. Marat. They had 90 minutes. Roman briefed her at the table while Matteo was on the phone in the corridor, his voice low and rapid, coordinating what she understood to be a perimeter operation. His people outside, invisible, which was the only version of backup that didn't trigger whatever Webb had planned to trigger when the wrong faces came through the door. Webb was 62, former banking, had been Caruso's money architect for 7 years. Not a violent man. That was Roman's assessment, and she trusted Roman's assessments because he was precise. Webb was a man who understood leverage and had decided that his leverage in Caruso's organization had a shorter shelf life than the leverage of the documentation he'd accumulated. He was trying to exit. He was using her as the exit door. He'll have people in the building, Roman said. Not many. If he has too many people, Caruso will know he's moving, and Webb can't afford that. 2, maybe 3. Insurance. What does the exchange actually look like? You go in. Webb shows you proof of the documentation. You confirm it's real. You tell him the terms are accepted. He transfers the copies to a secure channel. You leave. And if the terms aren't accepted, Roman looked at her. The terms are accepted, whatever he asks for. Who decides that? Matteo decides that. Does Matteo know what he's going to ask for? We have a reasonable idea. Roman folded the briefing papers. Webb wants to disappear. New identity, relocation, enough money to make the relocation comfortable. He doesn't want Caruso to find him, and he doesn't want Vincetti to know he talked. He wants to be gone before morning. That's achievable. Yes. Then what's the problem? Roman looked at her. The problem is that Webb sent the nurse specifically. Not Matteo, not a negotiator. The nurse. Which means he's thought about this carefully enough to identify the one person in Matteo's household who doesn't present as a threat and who has independent motivation. He paused. Which means he's smart, and smart men who are running scared make unpredictable decisions. She filed this. Matteo came back in. He'd changed. She noticed because she noticed everything, into clothes that were darker, more operational. He looked at her across the room. Car's ready, he said. I need 5 minutes with you, she said. Alone. The 2 men at the monitors looked at Matteo. He nodded once and they cleared the room. Roman followed. Felix lingered. Felix? Matteo's voice. Felix went. The door closed. They were in the East Wing room alone with the documents on the table and the monitors running data and the photograph of the freight terminal sitting at the edge of the table like something waiting to be picked up. If this goes wrong, she said, my father's involvement needs to stay contained, not for his sake. He made his choices and he'll live with them, for the sake of whatever legal defense you need to run on the financial contamination. If Graham Ellison's name is in any public record connected to this, it creates a chain that leads to your hotels. I know. Do you already have people managing that? Since this afternoon, she looked at him. You moved fast. I move fast when I need to. He looked at her. The controlled expression and the stripped one were both present simultaneously, layered, and she was close enough now in 23 days of proximity, of reading him the way she read everything, to see both at once. Briar. I know, she said. I know what you're going to say. Then tell me. You're going to tell me I don't have to do this, that you'll find another way, that the contract doesn't cover this, and you're not asking me to. I'm not going to say any of that. His voice was very quiet. I was going to say that if anything feels wrong in that building, anything, a word, a movement, something you can't name but that registers, you leave. You don't negotiate. You don't manage the situation. You walk out. She looked at him. I will not trade the ledger for you, he said. I want to be clear about that. The documentation matters. Your safety matters more. He said it with the particular precision of someone saying a true thing they hadn't decided to say until it was already out. If Webb tries to make you the leverage instead of the broker, the exchange is over. The room was very quiet. That's not a tactically sound position, she said. No, he agreed. It's not. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the photograph of the freight terminal. Tell me the exit routes. The terminal was on the south waterfront, 20 minutes in a car that felt like 4. She sat in the back with Roman driving and the city going past the windows in the wet November dark, and she did what she did before every high-stakes procedure. She ran the sequence, forward and backward, identifying the decision points, the places where she would need to choose fast. She was not carrying anything. No weapon, which she didn't want and wouldn't use correctly under pressure. No recording device. Webb would check, and a discovered device would end the exchange before it started. She had her phone, a number programmed for Roman, and the authority to confirm terms on Mateo's behalf. She had her eyes and her training and the specific quality of attention that 10 years of trauma nursing had built into her nervous system. The ability to read a room fast, to identify what was wrong before she could articulate it, to make decisions under pressure without freezing. She had those things. She had to trust they were enough. The terminal appeared through the windshield, a long, low industrial building, the waterfront dark behind it, 2 lights at the main entrance exactly where the photograph had shown them. 2 at the door, Roman said quietly. That we can see. Stop here. He stopped half a block out. She looked at the building. Her heart rate was elevated. She clocked it, filed it, let it run. Fear was information. She was afraid because the stakes were real. I go in alone, she said. I'm 50 meters behind you. You don't come in unless I call. Breyer, Roman. She looked at him. If Webb sees anyone follow me in, this ends badly. You stay out unless I call. He looked at her in the rear view. His jaw was tight. Understood. She got out of the car. The waterfront air hit her. Cold, industrial, diesel and water and rust. Her shoes were wrong for this ground, but she walked evenly, maintaining pace, and the 2 men at the terminal entrance watched her come without moving. As she got closer, she saw they were not Webb's men. Older, heavier, the posture of people who had been paid to stand somewhere and not think about it. Harlan Webb, she said at the door. He's expecting me. One of them opened the door. Inside was worse than the outside, in the way that insides always were. The dark more concentrated, the sound different, the air stale and close. The terminal was maybe 200 feet long, old industrial shelving running down both sides, empty, the fluorescent fixtures overhead doing the minimum. At the far end, under the only cluster of lights that was fully functional, a man was sitting at a folding table. She walked toward him. Webb was exactly his briefing photograph, silver-haired, compact, the kind of face that had once projected institutional authority and now projected the specific anxiety of a man who understood exactly how exposed he was. He was wearing a good coat over clothes that were wrong for the location, the clothes of someone who had dressed for a different night and ended up here. He watched her cover the distance between them without speaking. She watched him watch her, tracking, reading, doing the same work she was doing from the other direction. She sat down across from him. She did not offer her hand. He did not offer his. You're the nurse, he said. I'm Breyer Ellison. I'm here on Mateo Voss's authority to receive the documentation and confirm the terms of your arrangement. You're very calm. I'm always calm. She looked at him. You went to considerable effort to request me specifically. I'd like to understand why. Webb looked at her for a moment. Because you're the only person in that household who isn't his. Not really. He folded his hands on the table. You came in under a debt contract. You're serving a term. That means your loyalty has a defined limit and a defined price, and I thought that made you tractable. And now, he looked at her eyes. Now I'm reconsidering. Good. She kept her voice level. Let's talk about the documentation. Webb reached into the coat and produced a tablet. He turned it to face her. On the screen was a financial record, columns of transfers, dates, account numbers, the routing infrastructure of 2 years of money movement through Mateo's hotel accounting system. She looked at it without touching it. That's a sample, Webb said. The full archive is 63 files. Transaction records, correspondence between Caruso and the conduit accounts, and, he paused, deliberate, a summary memo that Caruso wrote 18 months ago outlining the strategy. The memo names Voss's infrastructure by name and describes it as unwitting. It's the clearest possible documentation that Voss had no knowledge of the operation. She looked up from the tablet. You're offering him exculpatory evidence. I'm offering him the documentation that proves Caruso built a shadow operation in his house without his knowledge. Yes. Webb's voice was steady, but his hands were not. She saw the micro tremor in the fingers, controlled, but there. In exchange for relocation, new documentation, and enough capital to establish a new life outside this city and this business. That's achievable, she said. I know it is. That's why I asked for you. I needed someone who would tell me the truth about whether it was achievable, not someone who would tell me what their boss wanted me to hear. He looked at her. Is it achievable? Yes, she said. He'll give you what you're asking for. Your word on that? My word, and his authority transmitted through me, yes. Webb let out a slow breath. He reached into the coat again and this time produced a small drive. He set it on the table between them. The transfer protocol, he said. Your man Roman has the secure channel information. When the transfer is confirmed, I walk out of here tonight and I'm gone by morning. She looked at the drive. She looked at Webb. And she saw it. She didn't know what it was yet. Something in the way his eyes had moved just once to a point over her left shoulder, the specific involuntary check of a man who knew where his backup was positioned and had just confirmed it was still there. Something in the way his breath had changed 2 minutes ago, the slight quickening of a man who was past the point of no return in a plan that had a second half she wasn't seeing. She kept her face exactly as it was. The drive, she said. I'll need to verify the file structure before Roman initiates the transfer. Of course. She reached for it. Her phone rang. She looked at it. Not Roman's number, her father's number, the monitored line from the estate. Her father did not call her. She called him. He had never once called the estate line since she'd arrived, because she had told him not to. She looked at Webb. Webb looked at her phone. His face did not change. It was the face of a man holding very still, and she understood, with the cold dropping clarity of a diagnosis arriving all at once, that Webb's insurance was not the 2 men at the door. Where is my father? She said. Webb's hands were flat on the table. Mr. Ellison is perfectly safe, he said. He's going to stay safe. This is not what you think. Tell me what it is. It's a guarantee. His voice was still measured, still the voice of a man running a negotiation. I need to know the exchange will complete, that Voss won't take the drive and cancel the arrangement once he has what he wants. Your father is insurance against that outcome. When I'm clear of Chicago, he goes home. She sat very still. Her heart was doing something significant in her chest. She filed it. You took my father, she said. He's being held somewhere comfortable. He's not harmed. He won't be harmed. You took my father to use as leverage against Matteo Voss. She looked at Webb. And you told me about it, in this building, in front of your own people. She paused. Why? Webb looked at her. Something shifted in his face, the first crack in the professional surface, something underneath it that was more human and more afraid. Because I need you to understand I'm serious. I understand you're serious. She picked up the drive. I also need you to understand something. She looked at him across the table. The man whose infrastructure you used for 2 years, whose household you put a back door in, whose financial portfolio you put at risk, he is, right now, within 300 meters of this building, and he came here for the documentation, and he is going to get it. Her voice was completely even. But I've been a trauma nurse for 10 years, and I know what a man looks like when he has made a desperate decision and is in the process of discovering it was the wrong one. She held his gaze. You are that man right now. You made a move that felt like control, and it has made your situation worse, not better. Because now Matteo Voss knows you have his father's, his contractors, his... She stopped, chose the word precisely. She stopped, chose the word precisely. His person. And what that means is that the exit you negotiated just became contingent on my cooperation. And my cooperation just became something you can no longer assume. The terminal was very quiet. Webb was looking at her. Call it off, she said. Release my father. The terms you negotiated are still on the table, but you have about 4 minutes before Matteo gets the same information I just did. And after that, the terms are going to look very different from anything you want to be part of. The terminal held its breath. Webb's hands were still flat on the table. His face had gone through 3 expressions in the last 4 seconds: calculation, recalculation, and the specific gray stillness of a man who had arrived at a decision point and found that both options had teeth. He was looking at her with the focused, unblinking attention of someone trying to determine how much of what she just said was performance and how much was architecture. She gave him nothing to read. She had learned that a long time ago. In triage bays and ICS, in the rooms of families receiving catastrophic news, that a face with nothing on its surface gave the other person nowhere to push. 4 minutes, she said again. Webb looked at the drive in her hand, then at the table, then at something behind her that she did not turn to look at. His breath came out slow. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a phone. He dialed. It rang twice. "Let him go," Webb said. "Now." The address he came from. He listened. "I said now." He hung up. Breyer's phone buzzed. She looked at it. A text from Roman's number. 2 words. "He's clear." She set the drive on the table. "Roman initiates the transfer in the next 10 minutes, she said. "You sit here until it's confirmed. Then you walk out, and you become whoever your new documentation says you are, and you don't come back to the city. And Voss will honor the arrangement." She stood. "He told me to tell you he would. I told you I would tell you the truth. That's the truth." Webb looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. A small, precise movement, the nod of a man who had run out of plays and was accepting the hand that remained. She walked toward the exit. She was halfway down the length of the terminal when the side door blew in. Not an explosion. The door itself, metal, kicked open with the specific force of someone who had been waiting outside it and had received a signal she hadn't seen. 2 men came through, fast, moving low, and behind them a third. And she recognized the third before she fully registered the movement because she had seen him at the peace dinner, at the edge of the photographs Roman had shown her in the briefing. Caruso. Not a tall man, not physically imposing, the kind of face that furniture stores had as managers, competent, ordinary, the face of a man whose danger lived entirely in what he knew and what he was willing to do with it. He was holding nothing. He didn't need to hold anything. His 2 men were between him and Webb in 4 steps. "Harlan," Caruso said. His voice was conversational. "You've had a busy night." Webb had gone white. Not the white of surprise. The white of a man who had known this was a possible outcome and had been living with the knowledge of it for weeks and was now in the middle of it. Breyer stopped moving. Caruso looked at her. His eyes moved over her with the comprehensive indifference of a man cataloging something he hadn't decided the value of yet. "The nurse," he said. Voss really did send the nurse. "He sent me," she said. Her voice was level. Her heart was doing something violent in her chest that she was categorically ignoring. "The exchange is already in process. The documentation transfer has been initiated." "Has it?" Caruso's voice didn't change. "Then it needs to be stopped." "It can't be stopped from here." "Then we'll take you somewhere it can be stopped from." She looked at the 2 men between her and the door. She looked at Caruso. She looked at Webb, who was standing very still behind the table with the expression of a man watching a building he set fire to burning in a direction he hadn't planned. She thought about Roman, 50 meters outside. She thought about what Roman had said, "I'm 50 meters behind you," and about what 50 meters meant in a building with a door that had just been kicked in on the opposite side from the main entrance. "Caruso," she said. He looked at her. "The documentation you're trying to stop. It includes a memo, 18 months old, written by you." She watched his face. "The memo describes Matteo Voss's infrastructure as unwitting. Your word. It's the clearest possible exculpatory statement for his position and the clearest possible liability for yours." She paused. "If that memo is already transferred and you take me out of this building, you've accomplished nothing except handing Matteo Voss a specific personal reason to find you." She held his gaze. "Is that the calculation you're running?" The 2 men looked at Caruso. Caruso looked at Breyer. The terminal was very, very quiet except for the distant water sound of the waterfront and the buzzing of the 2 fluorescent fixtures overhead. Then the main door opened and Matteo walked in. He came through the door the way he came through every space, unhurried, weight distributed evenly, Nothing on the surface that wasn't placed there deliberately. He had two men with him, and he didn't look at either of them. He looked at the room, Caruso, his men, Webb at the table, Breyer in the middle, and he took it in the way he took in everything, completely and without theater. He looked at Breyer last. His eyes ran over her, fast, thorough, the specific inventory of a man checking for damage. And then he looked at Caruso. "Leo," he said to one of his men. Not a sentence, just the name. And Leo moved to a flanking position that completed a geometry Caruso's people had not anticipated. Caruso's hands didn't move, but his eyes did. He was recalculating. "The documentation transferred 11 minutes ago," Matteo said. He said it to Caruso the way he said everything, flat, informational, the voice of a man who had stopped needing to perform his authority because it had long since become structural. "Your financial operation running through my infrastructure is documented, traced, and currently in the hands of 3 separate parties, 2 of which are outside this city." He paused. "I'm not going to have this conversation in a freight terminal. You're going to come with me, and we're going to sit down, and you're going to tell me every name and every account number and everything else that's been running through my houses for 2 years. He looked at Caruso steadily. "And then we'll discuss what happens to you." Caruso looked at the room. He looked at the geometry of it. Matteo's men, the angles, the door he'd come in through, and what was standing between him and it. "You're not going to—" Caruso started. "I'm not going to do it here," Matteo said. "That's what I just told you." His voice didn't change, didn't harden, didn't need to. "You put 2 years of contamination into my operation without my knowledge, and you used a sick old man to do it, and tonight you grabbed that same man off the street to use against his daughter." "Ish boy seeds." He paused. "I'm very angry, Caruso. I'm keeping it somewhere you can't see it because this isn't the place, but it's there in Chkistek." He looked at him. "Come with me now, or don't. But if you don't, the version of what happens to you is substantially worse than the version where you do." Caruso stood very still. Then, without a word, he walked toward the door. Graham Ellison was sitting in the back seat of a car outside a parking garage on West Erie when Roman got to him. He had a cut on his forehead from when they'd taken him. Not serious, superficial, the kind that bled aggressively and looked worse than it was. He was wearing his coat wrong, one side pulled off the shoulder, the way clothing went when someone had grabbed it, and he was sitting with his hands between his knees and his head down. Breyer got to the car 12 minutes after the terminal. She opened the door and looked at her father. He looked up. His one good eye, the same eye she had iced in her apartment, had gone wide and wet and old in the way that fear aged people, the way she had seen it age people in waiting rooms and hallways for 10 years. "I'm okay," he said. His voice was ragged. "I can see that." She got in beside him, looked at his forehead. "Hold still." She pressed her fingers to the cut, checking depth, checking the tissue around it. Superficial. Her hands were steady. "How's your head?" "Breyer, how's your head?" "It's fine. I'm fine." He grabbed her hand. Not the checking grip from the elevator, something rawer than that, something with more weight in it. "I'm sorry, I am so sorry, for all of it." She held his hand. She looked out the window at the waterfront dark. "I know," she said. "I put you in there. I put you in that house, and in that building, and Dad." She looked at him. His face was a map of everything that had gone wrong across the last decade, and she had been angry at that map for so long, and the anger was still there, old and structural. But sitting in the back of this car on this waterfront with the cut on his forehead and his hand around hers, the anger was just part of the landscape. Not gone. Just contextualized. Given its actual size, which was smaller than the fear had made it look. "You made bad choices. A lot of them. Over a lot of years." She held his gaze, and I walked into that house with my own eyes open, and I made my own choices in there, and some of them turned out to mean something to me, and those are mine, not yours. Graham looked at her. His eye was wet. "I'm going to take you to Shen," she said. "She'll look at the cut. Then you're going home, and tomorrow you're going to call the counselor whose number I have been trying to give you for 2 years, and you're going to make an appointment." She looked at him steadily. Not gambling, not drinking, not optimistic thinking. An actual appointment with an actual professional. Okay, he said. Barely a sound. Okay, she said. She didn't let go of his hand until Roman started the car, Sheb. The reckoning with Caruso took 4 hours. Breyer wasn't in the room for it. She treated Graham's forehead, sent him home in a car with 2 of Roman's people, checked on Castillo's overnight recovery, updated Santos's file with the hospital's discharge notes that had come in that afternoon. She did the work that was hers to do. She kept her hands busy and her mind on the next immediate task, which was how she had always managed the hours that followed catastrophic events. At 2 in the morning, she was in the facility writing notes when the door opened and Matteo came in. He looked like someone who had spent 4 hours in a room extracting information from a person who did not want to give it. She had never seen him look tired. She had seen him look like he was managing exhaustion, which was different. But this was closer to the real thing. The coat was gone. His jaw carried 24 hours of shadow. He moved into the room and sat in the chair next to her desk, the recovery chair that Rourke used and Felix used and Santos had used, and he sat in it like someone who had run out of reasons to remain upright. She looked at him. "How's your father?" he said. "Superficial cut, minor shock? He'll be fine. I sent him home." She looked back at her notes. "Caruso?" "Talking." He leaned his head back against the wall. "He'll keep talking for a while. Everything Webb documented is confirmed. The routing structure, the account relationships, the insertion points." A pause. "2 of my hotel accountants were complicit. Didn't know the full picture, but knew enough to look away. They'll be addressed. And Vincetti? Vincetti will hear from me in the morning. He'll deny knowing what Caruso was running. He's probably telling the truth. Caruso was operating independently, using the Vincetti infrastructure as cover while building his own position." He closed his eyes. "Vincetti will be angry. A man building a competing operation inside his organization is not something he sanctioned." He paused. "That anger is useful to me." "So the territory dispute resolves differently than it would have yesterday." He opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling. "Caruso is the reason Reyes pulled a weapon at the peace dinner. Reyes was Caruso's man, not Vincetti's. He was trying to start a war between our organizations while Caruso finished positioning himself." He looked at her. "You exposed Reyes at the dinner, before the weapon." She thought back. The peace dinner, the comment she'd made to Matteo afterward. She hadn't been in the dining room. "I didn't expose anyone. I observed something and mentioned it." "You observed that Reyes had been coached on specific details of my operation that a mid-level underboss shouldn't have known. You made the comment to Felix before the dessert course." He looked at her. "Felix told me. I moved the security configuration before Reyes acted. It contained the damage." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know that's what I was doing." "I know." His voice was very even. "That's what made it useful. You weren't maneuvering. You were just reading the room." She set down her pen, turned to face him fully. He was looking at her. The tired version of his face was different from the controlled version, not weaker, just more immediate, closer to the surface of whatever the interior landscape actually looked like. "The contract," he said. She waited. "The debt is cleared," he said it simply. "Not at the end of 2 years, as of tonight." He reached into his shirt pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. He set it on the desk beside her notes. She looked at it. It was a copy of the contract, her copy, the one her lawyer had, the matching page. The word void was written across it in pen. She looked at it for a long time. "Your father's involvement doesn't leave this house," Matteo said. "The accountants who were complicit are the official explanation for the insertion points. Graham Ellison's name is not in any record connected to the operation." He paused. "That's not generosity. It's what makes the legal position cleanest. But it also means he walks away from this without consequences. He wouldn't survive." "I know." She looked at the voided contract. "Thank you." "Don't." She looked at him. "Don't thank me," he said. "You walked into a freight terminal tonight with a ledger drive and 4 minutes of negotiating time, and you held Caruso's people off long enough for the transfer to complete. You told me about the access codes 40 minutes after finding out. You kept Santos alive through the night when the easier move was to let someone else carry it." He held her gaze. "You don't owe me gratitude. If anything, the math runs the other direction." She looked at the voided contract, at the pen line through everything that had brought her here. "I'm free," she said. She said it quietly, not as a question, just as a statement of a new fact that she was holding up to the light to see its actual shape. "You're free," he said. She folded the contract, put it in her pocket. "I'm going to go to bed," she said. "I've been awake for 22 hours and I need to think clearly, and I can't do that in this condition." "I know." She stood, looked at him. He was still in the recovery chair, jacket gone, the exhaustion he was usually so careful to manage sitting openly on his face. "You should sleep too," she said. "I know that's not a request you receive well. I'm making it anyway." Something moved in his face that was almost the smile, and then became something different. Quieter, more complete. The expression of a man who had stopped calculating. "Good night, Briar," he said. "Good night," she said, and went to her room. She slept for 9 hours. When she woke, the light was wrong, too late, too bright, and for a moment she lay in the bed in the room that had been hers for 25 days and looked at the ceiling and took stock of the full accounting of the previous 72 hours. She did it methodically, the way she did inventories, what was spent, what remained, what needed to be ordered. Her father was home. The debt was cleared. The contract was voided. She was free to leave this house today, this morning, to call a cab and collect her things and return to the apartment on West Huron and the life that existed before midnight of 25 days ago. She lay there for a long time. Then she got up, got dressed, and went to the facility. Shen was already there. She looked at Briar over the rim of her coffee cup, said nothing, handed her a copy of the morning's patient notes. Castillo's final concussion check, Marco's sign-out from restricted activity, a follow-up request from Felix about the shoulder. Briar read them, made 2 notes, handed them back. "There's a board meeting," Shen said. Briar looked at her. "The legitimate businesses, Voss Holdings and the hotel group. There's a quarterly board meeting this afternoon." Shen set her cup down. "He asked me to tell you if you were still here this morning." She went to the board meeting. It was in the main house, the formal dining room repurposed. Documents on the table, 6 people she recognized as legal and financial staff, Mateo at the head. He looked different in this context. Still the same person, but the operational darkness of the previous night fully compressed. The version of himself that ran legitimate enterprises forward and in the light. He looked at her when she came in, said nothing, indicated a chair. She sat. The meeting ran 2 hours. She understood approximately 60% of what was discussed and spent the other 40% listening for what she didn't understand. The hotel group's medical clinic partnerships were on the agenda. The private facilities, the arrangement with a hospital network that was still in preliminary discussion. There were questions about liability structure and scope of services and the regulatory landscape for private clinical operations. She spoke once about patient confidentiality in corporate medical settings, about what the regulatory requirements actually were versus what the legal team seemed to believe they were. She said it precisely and without softening it. Mateo looked at her across the table. After the meeting, when the staff had cleared, she stayed. He sat at the other end of the table, looking at her. "The clinic network," she said. "The legitimate partnership with the hospital group." "Yes. If it's structured correctly, you could run a real trauma clinic, not just the facility here, a proper public-facing clinic, in a neighborhood that doesn't have adequate emergency care access. Funded through the hotel group's charitable arm, which I looked at during the meeting and is currently doing very little." She held his gaze. "You have the infrastructure and the capital, and I have 10 years of clinical experience and the professional network to staff it correctly. It would take 6 months to set up properly, and it would generate genuine community benefit, and it would—" She paused, choosing, "It would make the legitimate side of your operation something that actually does something." Mateo was very still. "I'm not naive about what else your operation does," she said. "I'm not proposing to fix that with a clinic. I'm proposing to build something real inside the structure that already exists." She looked at him. "I'm proposing it because I want to do it, not because I'm still here under obligation. The contract is voided. This is a choice." He looked at her for a long moment. "Why?" he said. "Because I spent 25 days in a facility treating men that the rest of the medical system doesn't reach. And the work mattered, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't. She looked at her hands on the table. And because somewhere in the last 25 days, this stopped being an arrangement I was surviving and became something I was building. She looked up. I want to keep building it. The dining room was quiet. Through the window, she could see the garden, the late November light flat and gray across the ordered rows. There's something else you should say, Matteo said. She looked at him. You're going to tell me that choosing to stay doesn't mean choosing to be complicit in everything, that you'll continue to tell me when I'm wrong and to refuse what you won't do, that this arrangement has limits and those limits are yours to define. He held her gaze. You were about to say it. I was, she said. Do you need me to? No, he said. I know what I'm agreeing to. She nodded. Once, the nod of a woman who had made a decision and was standing inside it fully. The clinic, she said. I want to call it something direct, not named for anything, not branded for anyone, just what it is. What is it? A place that stabilizes people, she said. That's all. A place where the work is the point. Matteo stood. He came down the length of the table and stopped 2 feet from her, not invading anything, just close. The distance of two people who had spent 25 days reading each other in close quarters and had stopped pretending they didn't know what they'd found. I'm not going to ask you to belong to this house, he said. His voice was quiet and direct. The voice she had come to understand was the one he used when he was being most honest. That's not... I don't want that. I want you here because you choose to be here, every day. He paused. When that stops being the choice, I want you to leave. She looked at him. And if it doesn't stop? Something in his face went through the almost smile and out the other side into something larger and quieter and more costly. The expression of a man allowing himself to want something he had decided he wasn't allowed to want. Then we build something, he said. That's also a choice. She held his gaze. Her heart was doing something that she did not try to file under any clinical category because it didn't belong in one. Okay, she said. The word was small. What was inside it was not. 3 months later, the clinic opened. It was on the west side, in a neighborhood 2 miles from the hospital where Breyer had trained, in a building that had been a community center, and before that a light manufacturing space, and before that, something she didn't know and didn't need to. The renovation had taken 11 weeks. The staff had taken longer to assemble. She had been particular about it, which Roman had observed with the specific expression he used when he was not going to say anything but had opinions. She had been particular because it mattered, because the people who came through those doors were going to be people the system had already failed at least once, and the staff needed to understand that the work was the work, and that the work was the point. The morning it opened, she stood outside on the sidewalk for a few minutes before she went in. The sign above the door was simple. No logo, no corporate identity, just the name she had argued for and gotten. The November cold had given way to late winter, gray and flat, the streets wet from overnight rain. Graham called at 7:50. I drove by, he said. You're not supposed to be driving yet. He'd had a knee surgery 3 weeks ago, unrelated to everything, just the accumulated cost of 6 decades of living. And she had been very specific about his restrictions. I went slow, he said. It looks good, Breyer. It looks real. She looked at the sign. It is real. I know. His voice was different from the phone calls she'd grown up with, quieter, the edges steadied. He had been seeing the counselor twice a week for 11 weeks. He had not gambled. She knew this the way she knew the status of any patient she was monitoring, not by faith, but by data, by the consistent indicators of a person doing the work. I'm proud of you. She didn't say anything for a moment. Don't drive anymore today, she said. Go home. I know. She could hear the almost smile in his voice, the expression she had apparently gotten from him, one of the few things he'd given her she was glad to have. Go do your work. She went inside. The clinic ran 9 patients that first day. By the end of the second week, it was running 22. By the end of the first month, she had a waiting list she was working to address with a second clinician she'd recruited from Mercy General, a woman named Torres, who had the same particular quality that Shen had, the quality of someone for whom the work was genuinely the point. Matteo came to the clinic once in the second week, On a Tuesday afternoon when the waiting room had 8 people in it, and Dev was managing the intake, and Breyer was between patients. He came in the way he came into every space, without announcement, without performance, and he stood in the waiting room and looked at it. The people. The work in progress. She saw him from the doorway of the treatment room. He looked at her. She held up one finger, 1 minute, and turned back to her patient. When she came out, he was sitting in one of the waiting room chairs like a regular person, which was one of the stranger things she had seen in recent memory, and she went and sat in the chair beside him because there was nowhere else to do this conversation. "Torres is good," he said. "She's excellent. The building's utilities were updated incorrectly in the renovation. I'm having someone come back in." "I know. I already called them." He looked at her. The look had changed in 3 months, or maybe she had changed in the way she could read it. It had more surface area now, the almost smile less compressed, something freer underneath the control, not less dangerous, just more present. "Rourke asked about you this morning," he said. "I saw him last Tuesday at the facility. His follow-up was clear. He knows that. He asked how you were, which is different." She looked at the waiting room. 8 people. A woman with a child on her lap who kept trying to slide off. A man with his arm wrapped in cloth that she was going to need to unwrap shortly. An older woman with a blood pressure monitor reading she'd brought in from a pharmacy, the paper still in her hand. 25 days ago, she had walked into Mateo Voss's estate with a bag, an avoided version of her own life, and she had not known what she would find inside it. She had found Shen and Roman and Felix's shoulder and Santos through the night, and Rourke in the doorway and the stone bench in the garden at 7 in the morning, and a man who had told her about the rouse his father built and had not dressed it up as anything other than what it was. She had found the work, which was the thing she had always been most herself inside. She had found, quietly, at the edges of everything else, accumulating in the spaces between hard nights and honest conversations, an avoided contract on a facility desk, something she did not have a clinical term for, and did not need one. "Tell Rourke I'm fine," she said. "Tell him I'll see him Thursday for the standard follow-up." "I'll tell him." She stood. The man with the wrapped arm was looking at her. She looked back, the signal she used. "I see you, I'm coming. 2 minutes. I have patience," she said. "I know." Mateo stood. He looked at her, the full, quiet, costly version of looking that had become its own language across the preceding months. "I'll see you tonight." "Tonight," she agreed. He walked out. She walked in. The work was the work, and it was the point, and she was exactly where she had chosen to be, in the building she had chosen to build, on the side of something she had chosen to stand on, not because she'd been placed there, not because a contract had told her to, not because she had traded herself for someone else's survival, because she had looked at the full shape of it, clearly and without flinching, and had decided it was worth building. That was the only reason that held. The man with the wrapped arm looked at her as she approached, and she could see, already, that the cloth was covering something that had been waiting too long for attention, and she sat down across from him and said, "Let me see," in the voice that meant, "I'm going to take care of this," and he unwrapped his arm, and she looked at what was there and got to work. Outside, the late winter light came down gray and even on the west side street, and the clinic sign said what it said, and the door opened and closed with the regular rhythm of people arriving, and the work went on.